I think we've got most people on. I don't see Leela just yet, so we'll give her a second to join before we call the meeting to order. Hope everybody's doing well.
So Kim, this is your last meeting with us?
This is my last meeting.
And unless you decide to come back and visit, I'll never get a chance to actually meet you in person.
And it's strange, isn't it?
It is. We've gone over a year now almost with remote meetings, and I haven't met anyone.
Maybe I can attend as a guest when we get back in person.
Sounds like a good idea. So are you retiring, or are you moving on to something else?
I am moving on to something else.
Of course. You're too young to retire.
Yeah, I don't know that I ever want to retire unless I absolutely have to. I think it's good to stay busy at something.
That's why I'm here.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. I don't see Leela just yet, but as far as I know, she will be joining us. So welcome to everyone. And we will call to order the April 14th State Water Infrastructure Authority meeting. Reminder of the conflict of interest in compliance with the State Government Ethics Act. The State Government Ethics Act, North Carolina General Statute 138A, mandates that the chair inquires whether there is any known conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any matters before the authority today. If any member knows of a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest, please identify the conflict at the time the conflict becomes apparent. Are there any known conflicts at this point?
No.
Hearing none, we will note that I will recuse myself from agenda item F. Even though we don't think there's a conflict of interest, we have not sought yet a formal opinion, mainly because I'm retiring and the point is moot after today. So at that point for agenda item F, I will recuse myself and turn that agenda item over to Vice Chair Honeycutt, and then rejoin as chair after that is over. Let me just check the chat. So for WebEx panelists, which are the members and staff, please remember to mute when not speaking. And of course, remember to unmute when you do want to speak. All our attendees are muted. I will now go through the roll call for attendance and do that in alphabetical order. Melody?
Present.
Sharon?
Present.
Thank you. Has Leela joined us? Here. Ed?
Here.
Maria? Maria, I could just barely hear you. Just for the purposes of an audio test, could you repeat that?
I'm here. This is
Okay.
Maria. I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Bernadette?
Here.
And Johan?
Here.
Thank you. You may have noticed that I skipped over Cal Stiles in my chair's remark, alert you that, and speak a little more in detail, that he has resigned from the authority. So he will not be attending this meeting. Okay, Moving on to agenda item B, approval of the March 10th, 2021 meeting minutes. This is an action item. Motions and seconds will be considered yes votes when we go through the roll call. Are there any questions on the meeting minutes? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve. This is Ed Goshiska.
Thank you, Ed. Do we have a second?
Bernadette, I'll second.
Thank you, Bernadette. Any discussion? Hearing none, go through the roll call. Melody, aye or nay?
Aye.
Or maybe I should say yay or nay. Sharon?
Yay.
Leela, have you joined? No. Maria?
Yay.
And Juhan?
A.
Thank you. Maria, that was very enthusiastic. I appreciate that.
I did that on purpose, Kim. Yeah.
Moving on to agenda item C, the Attorney General's Office report. Jill, are you going to be this enthusiastic?
I'll try. So, it's your last time sharing, so we're going to do our best. I wanted to let everyone know that Attorney General Stein is leading a bipartisan group of state attorney generals, and it is truly a bipartisan group, in reaching out to Twitter, Facebook, the online services, asking them to please monitor closely the posting and attempted selling of fake COVID-19 vaccine cards. And you can read more about it on his website. But I think that this is so timely, and as the release points out, it creates confusion, and it will slow the efforts to get the pandemic under control. So they've taken, it's not a lawsuit, but they're asking for the websites to monitor their platforms for ads or links selling blank or fraudulently completed vaccine cards, to take down ads or links that are selling cards, and to preserve records and information about the ads and the people who were selling them, because they may face some legal consequences. But so I just wanted to let you know about that aspect of the Attorney General's work here in this past month.
Thank you, Jill. So moving on to agenda item D, Chair's remarks. As we were chatting before the meeting, right before the meeting started, this is my last authority meeting, since I will officially be retired at the end of this month. Also, Cal, as I noted earlier, submitted his resignation from the authority to Speaker Moore effective April 1st. Just want to note, excuse me, that we very much appreciate his time and input to the authority over the years. Cal was one of the original members of the authority, and he probably logged in more miles than anyone. Those of you who don't know, for him, it was I think about a 6-hour drive one way to Raleigh when we were meeting in person, and 6 hours back. So that was certainly a significant time commitment. And I suppose after today, Maria and Leela will be vying for the last original member standing award. Good luck to you both on outlasting the other. And just on that note, want to make sure I not only recognize Cal and the time that he spent on the authority, but also every authority member, past and present, and the willingness to serve and help out the state. We recognize you don't get paid. This is a volunteer thing. You have very busy lives, and your willingness to spend the time to review the information package, the background information, and the time in the meetings is very much appreciated. Lots of ongoing discussions on water infrastructure, funding in particular, both at the state and the federal level. There are several bills that either impact state revolving fund appropriations or language. In some cases, reauthorization that are being worked on in Congress. Lots of budget discussions going on, most of which are behind the scenes at this point. In the state legislature, some of that is discussions on what to do with the American Rescue Plan money, since water and sewer can be an eligible use for that money. Back to the federal legislation, I've been invited to testify in front of the House Infrastructure, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee next Wednesday on behalf of the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities. So looking forward to that. Hopefully that'll all go through. It's a virtual thing. So as we all know, virtual events sometimes aren't always the smoothest. On another note, the Environmental Finance Center has been working with the division to update our needs estimates. They did that for our master plan. I guess the needs were based back in 2016 for the 2017 master plan, if I remember correctly. So they're getting a little bit of age on them. Certainly, we have done a lot of work with asset inventory and assessment, in both encouraging it, but also providing grant funding for that. So it's not surprising the needs need to be updated, and that they're changing. Overall, the needs are going up considerably. Obviously, the cost of construction is going up. The more we know about our infrastructure, the more we realize that our needs are higher than maybe we thought they were. So back in 2016, the needs were estimated at 17 to 26 billion over 20 years, which is certainly a big number. That number is going up. Just in the next 5 years combined, for water, it looks like the needs are 3.9 to 6.3 billion. For wastewater, 5.6 to 7.9 billion. That's just in the next 5 years, not over 20 years. Collectively, over 20 years, that's up around 30 to 40 billion. Again, substantially higher than our 2016 estimates. But that's not all bad news. I don't think it's an indication that we're getting further behind necessarily, versus we're becoming more aware of our needs. And certainly it emphasizes the need to continue to encourage viable utilities, because there's no way we can grant our way through 30 to 40 billion in needs. Just a note, related to the budget, but not related to money, the governor's budget did contain some additions to 159G, including the ability to attach conditions to all grants, not just viable utility grants, and the ability on an ongoing basis to use any unused SRF match for state grants. We've had that as budget provisions over the last several years, and it adds a couple $100,000 sometimes to our overall state grant money, and it just kind of keeps the money within the realm of water infrastructure. So I think those are good things. Lots on the agenda today, so I will stop there and just reiterate that we very much appreciate the authority's time, because this is going to be a long meeting, and helping us work through some of these water infrastructure issues. So with that, we'll start off with agenda item E as an information item about the Community Development Block Grant Program. We thought it was important to start kind of reviewing some of these programs. This is something we did back when the authority first started, and it feels like it's time to kind of go back and do some refreshers. And so with this presentation, we have Colleen Simmons, who's with our Community Development Block Grant Program. Colleen, take it away.
Thank you, Kim. I am Colleen Simmons. I am the community specialist for our CDBG infrastructure group. I'm going to walk you through some information on our program. Our program is one of the unique ones in our division, so I'm sure it's going to be a lot of information for you guys. With that, our staffing right now, we have Unit Supervisor Julie Cabetta, who's actually retiring in a few weeks at the end of April. We have a Program Engineer, John Tucker. He's based out of the Washington Regional Office. We have a Compliance Specialist, that's myself. We have a Grants Coordinator, that's Stacy Starkey. She handles all our financials or anything that needs to get over to Commerce. And then we have 2 grant representatives. Stephanie Morris handles the eastern side of the state, and then Alyssa Rouse handles the Piedmont and the western side. And then we have some environmental support staff from Jennifer Haney and Susan Kabaki. They help us with our environmental compliance area. A quick summary of our program. We are a federally funded program from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, is like we like to call it. Our annual allocation varies by the budget that gets passed by the General Assembly. We are currently operating under our 2nd year of the current budget. Our funds, we have stipulations from HUD that we have to obligate all funds within the fiscal year within 15 months of obligation. That means we have to award, announce, and sign contracts with communities within 15 months of that award date. And just for your information, I think Julie's going to talk about it, but this fiscal 2020 round, our contract or agreement with HUD was signed on September the 2nd, 2019. So we have to obligate by December the 11th of this year. All funds within a fiscal year need to be expended within 7 years from the date of the HUD agreement. So that just means that by September 1st, 2026, all fiscal year 2020 funds must be spent by our communities. Some additional information, our program aims to create a healthy living environment through financing public water and sewer infrastructure. We try to mitigate public environmental health problems in areas where the percentage of low to moderate income persons is at least 51%. And what does LMI mean? It means from the HUD level, individual family household incomes must be no greater than 80% of the area median household income of the county or the jurisdiction they reside in. And HUD provides that data to us every April. They do area-wide analysis for us and give us the percentages for area-wide benefit for LMI persons. And then every June or July, they send down information on income levels for each jurisdiction that we pass on to our potential grantees. Again, our project must meet one of our national objectives, benefit to low to moderate income persons, aid in the prevention and elimination of slum and blight, or meet a need, have a particular urgency, or urgent need is what it is in our realm. Our program is set up to hit the first one, benefit low to moderate income persons. So all our projects, they must meet that eligibility requirement in order to come in the door for our project money. So program eligibility, low to moderate income is the first eligibility criteria that they have to meet, but our funds can only fund non-entitlement units of local government. Those are communities that have less than 50,000 population or counties with less than 200,000 population. We have a huge list of entitlement communities in our state that gets their money straight from HUD, so they can't come into our program. And then we have 4 counties in our state that are entitlement counties, and they as well get funds directly from HUD, so they can't come into our state program. Our program is set up to only give funds out to a single-purpose units of government. Single-purpose units of government are not eligible, so water and sewer districts or authorities cannot apply. They must work with a county or a city if they need funds to help improve infrastructure that will benefit those jurisdictions. Our program does not require a match, so it's always good to see it, but it's not a requirement. It's just the way we set up our program. Our program also has to adhere to lots of federal regulations and statutes, as well as state statutes and regulations dealing with procurement. When it comes to procurement, we rely on the most restrictive. That is why we have a program procurement policy to spell it out, who's is more restrictive in certain areas and what they need to do in order to comply with procurement. All right, so since we're a federally funded program, we have a lot of compliance areas that all our grantees must adhere to. And I have a few slides to walk you guys through on some of the compliance areas that they must adhere to in order to be in compliance with our program. So one of them is financial management. It's one of the key ones. We got to make sure that our communities that get funded have a conflict of interest policy, a code of conduct policy in hand, and we must see it once they get agreement signed with us. All local governments and contracting firms and businesses must have and maintain an active federal DUNS number. It provides accounting and transparency. And then they have to have timely expenditures of funds. If we see that they're not expending their funds, we'll be reaching out to them and say, what's going on? Why are you not requesting our funds? They have to maintain a complete documentation file on all financial decisions and transactions. And we look at those things out in the field. They have to provide annual audits to the LGC throughout the entire project. And then once they reach the threshold of $750,000, they must post their audit to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, as well as to the LGC. And then the final audit must also be posted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. Another area is non-discrimination, equal access. There is a lot of things under this category that our grantees must adhere to. They must adopt compliance and policies and plans to ensure all persons have equal access to project information, programs and project benefits, opportunities to provide comments on the project. And then just to quickly go through them, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as amended, the Fair Housing and Equal Housing Opportunity Act, limited English proficiency. That means that any public outreach, they must make sure that if they have limited English-speaking residents, that they have a different method to provide them information. They have to have a plan set up and adopted on how to address those. Excessive force policy they have to adopt as well. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the American Disabilities Act. Again, we have templates for all our grantees to walk them through these requirements, and then they have to be in compliance and document compliance throughout the entire project to make sure that this area is met. Another one is environmental review. All our projects, no matter what it is, must go through an environmental process. No matter if it's a small repair on a water tower or connecting homes or putting in new water lines. They have to go through the process that Jennifer Haney and Susan Kabaki has set up for us since the beginning, and it's an amazing program that they set up. But all grantees must go through it, must get clearance and approval before they do any choice limiting actions of any kind. That means they can't acquire property, they can't do easements, acquisitions, they can't start final design and surveying work until they get that release of funds from our office that says that the environmental process is done and it's in compliance. Another thing with our program that's unique is we are not allowed to put in new infrastructure in the floodplain or floodway, particularly in the floodway. In the floodway, we can only do direct boring under the river or flood, I think it's base flood elevation, as well as we can replace existing infrastructure that's on pilings, as long as those pilings or piers are existing. You can't install new ones and then put the infrastructure on top. That's not allowed. And that's a relatively new thing, a couple of years old. Before that, nothing could be done in the floodway in our program. Acquisition, demolition, and rehabilitation uniform Relocation Act. Again, this is a federal program, so any acquisitions, whether it's easements, purchasing land for a new water tower or substation or pump station, must go through the federal process of making sure people are aware of their rights, if they're receiving just compensation. If there's an appraisal that's needed, then there's thresholds that have to be met in order to get appraisal done. And if the appraisal is $10,000 or more, then a second appraisal is needed. So all our grantees that have that in their project must follow it, and we check it in the field before we pay for those things. Another area of compliance for our grantees is equal employment opportunities. Again, like I said, we have a mixture in this area of federal and state when it comes to procurement policy and contract management, minority and female business enterprises and historically underutilized businesses. They have to adhere to those requirements from the state and the feds about notification and inclusion. Local economic benefit, or Section 3 is what we call it, of the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968. That just means that low to moderate income residents of the project area must be encouraged and contacted if there is a need for jobs related to the project. All notices must have all these equal opportunity language in there so people know that they have the ability to put in their recommendations or qualifications and get assessed equally. Again, another one is all our contracts our grantees enter into must have federal clauses and provisions, executive orders, and labor standards and decisions all within them if they're applicable. That's one of the things we look at in the field, make sure all contracts, even if it's construction agreements, they have to be on file at the local level, whether it's a contractor and a subcontractor agreement or if it's the prime contractor with the local government. They all have to have the required language in them. And then all contractors, firms, and businesses must be eligible to work on the project. They have to have a DUNS number. If they're debarred from the federal level, then they cannot participate in our project because they did something wrong to be debarred. Another area that's important when it comes to construction of our program is labor standards, and it's the Davis-Bacon and related acts. This applies to all construction activities greater than 2,000. That just means that all construction work must pay at least the prevailing wage and fringe benefits of that county that the work is being done in. The engineers and grant administrators will pull that wage decision for the project before it goes out to bid, put it in the bid and design specs. We make sure it's the right one. It's always heavy construction for our projects, and then the contractors are all aware, and subcontractors must pay at least that. They also must pay overtime for their workers for time over 40 hours, and they must submit weekly certified payrolls and allow on-site interviews of their workers so the grant administrators and engineers out in the field can confirm that what's being reported on the payrolls is what's true out in the field. And there's also some posting requirement of the job site for equal opportunity signage, wage and labor standard posters that have to be on site as well, that they have to adhere to. And then we have performance measures, reporting, and record keeping. This is an ongoing thing for all our grantees. As soon as they sign the agreement with us, they have to make sure that they maintain their low to moderate income eligibility. We have milestones in all our grantee agreements that they have to meet or give us very valid reasons why they can't meet those milestones. But they're all laid out and they have to make sure that they adhere to them. There is quarterly, semi-annual, annual, and then sometimes monthly reporting is needed on job performance or project performance. That, the quarterly, we keep in-house, semi-annual, annual, that comes into the, our division, but we have to pass it on to the Department of Commerce, who's our lead agency for the program, and then they pass it up to the federal level for reporting on our program performance. And then, like we always say, every time we meet with somebody, it's documentation, documentation, documentation for our program. Unfortunately, we are Department of Environmental Quality, but our program requires a lot of paper to be used. So it's just one of the things that we have to do is everything, any decision, any process, any action must be documented on hard copy paper and in the file for ourselves to look at, any state agency that needs to look at our project, as well as the federal agencies that want to come down and look at our project documentation. It all has to be there. So with that, what do we do for training and outreach efforts to ensure compliance? We do a lot of stuff to make sure our grantees are staying in compliance throughout their project. One of the things we do is we always do potential applicant training and technical assistance at the very beginning of all our program funding rounds. We do in-person training of grantees, grant administrators, and project engineers. Last year with COVID being what it was, and right now, we do some in person, but we're doing a lot more virtual. We also do online resources on our website. I try to keep those resources up to date as much as I can, and everyone loves them. They pull it down. If they need a template for a citizen participation plan, they can go to our division website, go to that area, and they can pull it down, fill it out, get it adopted, and get it in their files and get it to us for our files. We do remote and desk monitoring and technical assistance. We do this a lot throughout the project, whether it's looking at financials in detail once they come in. We review documents all the time when they come in, or if we need to, we will ask for certain files from the field from our grantees, and they'll ship them to us, and we'll review them to make sure they're in compliance. The alternative to that is going out and do field monitoring or meetings and technical assistance. And those things can consist of doing pre-bid meetings, pre-construction meetings, monitoring visits that we're going out at least twice during a grant cycle and looking at their files, making sure that their documentation's in order, that they're compliant and they have all their compliance documentation. And anytime they have a question, we always are willing to meet with them in person or virtual phone on any of their technical questions. We are also doing virtual training of our grantees, grant administrators, and project engineers. We started doing that last May or June with COVID. We're going to continue that to some degree. We have 2 set up in May already. We don't know what we're going to do for the summer, if we're going to do the virtual or in person yet. And then we also have a program implementation manual that's coming soon because I need to get it into Julie's hands before she leaves. So that is my deadline. It's almost done. But that manual will be given to new grantees so they can have something in their hands of what they need to adhere to and how they need to do it step by step, best practices. So hopefully it'll be a good guide for them. With that, I want to give you guys just an overview of what our program consists of. I kind of went into detail about the compliance areas, but when we were first asked to do this presentation, they said, talk about what happens after the award is done. So I took that, and then I'm also going to talk about our pre-application intake phase. So we have 6 phases that are going on constantly. At any one point, we could have 4 or 5 or 6 phases going on at the same time. So staff is always doing multiple things at once, whether it's handling financial request for approvals, reviewing annual audits, plan reviews, project amendments, reviewing reports that come in, doing and conducting monitoring visits and conducting meetings, or just doing outreach, technical assistance, and training for all our grantees. So I'm going to quickly go through each phase to give you an idea of what those phases are. So the first phase is our pre-application intake phase. And what we do in this phase is staff is editing application guidance, supplemental appendices. We're pulling and providing the LMI data from the HUD office. Like I said, they just released one for April. They'll be releasing one again this summer. We're scheduling and conducting spring and summer how to apply training workshops. We have our first one on May the 5th via WebEx in the morning, and then we'll do another one with the rest of the division late July, early August. And we're also providing technical assistance to potential applicants on whether they have a viable project, if they're looking at their project correctly in order for points. We provide the TA form, and I've gone to these meetings in the field, or I've done them over the phone. I know Julie's done them over the phone, or met with them when they come to Raleigh. So the second phase is kind of what we're doing right now after I get done talking, is application review and award phase. And with this one, our staff is, we're always receiving our funding applications in September. Last year, with COVID, we pushed it to November to allow more time. But this intake for fiscal year 2021 will be September 30th, 2021. Once those applications come in, we split them between 4 staff members per application. so they can review applications, check LMI eligibility. There is a citizen participation documentation requirement for the application. They must hold a public hearing. So we're looking at that requirement. We're reviewing it against our priority rating system, and we're scoring their projects. We hold 2 consensus reviews during this time. The first review is after the first 2 reviewers look at an application. We come together and discuss the first 2 reviewers on all our applications, and then we go back out for the third and the fourth reviewers of those applications, and then we come back for the last time and say, okay, are we all in agreement with how these are scoring out? Let's discuss any differences and then go from there. From that, Julie and Stacy always develop and present staff recommendations for awards, and that's what she's going to be doing in a little bit. At the same time, we are editing contract or agreement templates, notice of award letters, and decline letters. We're doing notice of intent to fund letters, and we're identifying our grant milestones or benchmarks for our documentation. Getting that stuff ready to go, so once you guys give us the award list after today, we can hit the ground running on those things. The next phase is contract agreements, technical assistance, and TA. Once we receive our final awards from you guys, we will finalize and send out notice of award and letters and decline letters. We work with the awardees and new grantees to complete the required HUD forms. These forms are required in the application, but there's always something that we need to have them tweak. So Stacy's working with them to make sure that those forms are in order, and those forms go over to the Department of Commerce, who logs it into the HUD system, and they give us our grant numbers to put on the agreements. We're finalizing sending out notice of intent to fund letters and grant contracts or agreements. Once the grantees have those agreements, they execute them, send them back to us, and our division director will sign off on those contracts. At the same time, once those contracts come in, we're scheduling what we call our startup meetings or our new grantee training meetings. So we do new grantee training. We have, actually that's not April 29th anymore, we pushed it back to May. But that training will be procurement on how to procure for their grant administrators and project engineers. And then the June training is walking them through compliance areas as well as the environmental area. And then we, Stephanie and Alyssa will go out and do startup meetings with new grantees on how do they handle step-by-step on procedure rules, how do they turn in financial requests, that kind of thing. Another phase is the preliminary engineering report, compliance plans, and the environmental phase. During this time, our grantees are using their project engineers, grant administrators to develop these documents. Once they're developed and adopted locally or public comments done locally, they send them up to us, so we receive those, review them, and approve them. Again, that's environmental information document and release of funds, fair housing plans, policies, compliance plans and policies, engineering reports. There's also funding conditions in our agreements. We always have 2 that are standard. That's, we want to see the grant administrator contract and the environmental document that must be done. So those are always our 2 conditions, but based on their application, there might be some additional conditions that we need them to adhere to. And then once those things are met, we'll release their funds to take them out to construction. And we also do at least 1 compliance visit during this time. The final design, surveying, and construction phase, again, once they get notice that they can go out and do release surveying work, acquire property if they need it, work on surveying, final design. They do that. They submit for their permits. They send all that stuff to us, and John does a very good job on reviewing bid and design specs to make sure that the project they're proposing at the beginning of the process for installing water lines for this linear footage is what's going out for construction, as well as making sure that the project area hasn't changed from environmental, all those fun things. And then we also have conducting at least 1 compliance monitoring visit during this. We're looking at the labor standards, procurement of construction contractors, financial. We're attending pre-bids and pre-construction meetings Our spring has been a lot of these meetings with virtual or in person. We're also, during construction, we hold at least one construction inspection. Last year and right now, John does those things virtually. He asks for certain documents and photographs, and he reviews and blesses the process virtually instead of doing it on the ground. We also, if needed, we attend construction progress meetings. If we have a grantee that needs just a little bit more oversight than normal, we will attend those construction progress meetings as well. And then the last phase is our project closeout phase, and this happens once the construction is done. Our grantees must submit a final report to us, a final financial request report, and then once they get their final requisition done and pay all their bills, they must have a closeout public hearing and submit in a grant closeout package to us. Jennifer and Alyssa will review those closeout packets, agree to them or need clarification or additional information. Once that's approved by us, we put them under closed pending final audit, and then once that final audit comes in, we will review it and then close out the project. But we are also conducting final construction inspections, again, virtually right now. If we need to do a final monitoring visit, we will do that as well before they can close out. We also make sure that all financial audits are good. And those audits we look at to make sure our program's listed. That's key. If it's listed, make sure that the revenue and income are matching what we have for them in the financials. If there's issues, we work with the auditor as well as the community on addressing issues within their audit. And then we also make sure that final audit goes up to the federal clearinghouse. So with that, you're probably going, who have we provided assistance to over the years? And I put this little map together. I used to have a wall map, so I got more technical and put it in Google. This is just a spread, a representation of who we've assisted since 2013 when our program came over to this division. This map does not show, we had 4 communities that deobligated their grants completely. Those are not shown on this map. It also shows a dot or a little icon for a community that might have gotten 2 or 3 or 4 grants over the years. That's usually where you see the little clusters. Sometimes they're stacked on top of each other, but those are shown. But we have awarded, for your information, since 2013, over $188 billion. What?
Can't be $1 billion.
Okay, sorry. $188 million. It's $88.6 million since 2013, and that includes deobligated and school projects. For those new members of the authority, the school projects were deobligated funds that were sent over from the Department of Commerce to go to improving infrastructure in those communities that have issues with their infrastructure within the school system. And we were able to fund 4 of those school projects over the year. And those were, if you're interested, is Alexander, Wilkes County, Jackson County, and Columbus County for those school projects. So they're doing on-site improvements to the wastewater, drinking water for the school. And then we've served 75 total communities that received grants from us since 2013. And then their size, if you're interested in their size, we have, of those 75 communities, the median population size is 1,299. Or the average population size is 3,722. We've assisted, I think, 17 counties. 15 counties, sorry. I had to flip my notes. 15 counties have received funding from us as well since 13, and that includes schools as well as the deobligated grants that were out there. I just grouped them all together. The size of those counties that received our funding has been a median population size of 56,552, or an average population of 59,618. So we think we've done a great job getting the money out to people that in need. We wish we had more money to get out to more people. as you will see when Julie does her recommendation for the next 2020 funding. That is all I have.
Okay.
Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you, Colleen. That was great presentation, and I think gives the authority members a definite idea on how complex this program can be. Questions for Colleen or comments? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on. Thank you again, Colleen. That was a great presentation. I think it definitely gives you an idea just how complex CDBG can be. Before we move on to agenda item F, a couple of notes. One, for the record, I note that Leela has joined us and joined us, I think, just before that started. Leela, if you can just say something just to make sure your audio is working, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Leela. And then before we move on to agenda item F, as Colleen noted, Julie, who's the CDBG program manager, is retiring, and this is her last authority meeting. So I wanted, before we move on to agenda item F, wanted to just take a second and recognize the great work Julie has done from the beginning of getting this program off the ground. She really just kind of took the reins of the CDBG program when that program came in with the creation of the division. I knew with her experience at the Rural Center, I knew she understood rural communities across our state and was dedicated to helping them. You see the complexity of this program, and it took a significant effort to get the program up and running and developed. At the same time, we were developing the division as a whole, and getting it brought together and also off the ground. She's put together a fantastic staff. Colleen is definitely an example of that as well. And her staff really have this program really running smoothly. But I tell you, it was a lot of hours Julie put in getting this program off the ground, and we are very grateful for her efforts and wish her the absolute best in her retirement. With that, I will now turn off my audio and video, and I will turn the meeting over to Maria Honeycutt, our Vice Chair. Maria, take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. So as we're moving on, Julie, sorry, I got to get my head wrapped around. So now we're going to turn it over to Julie for the funding scenarios.
Yes, thank you, Maria. I have to admit, any success that we've had here has been due in large part to the incredible staff that I have been very, very lucky to be able to hire. From the very start, I had some really good people who had experience in this program, and we could not have done what we've done so far without those individuals on our staff. And also, tremendous thanks to Jennifer and Susan for developing the environmental review process. That was something that was already here when I first started, and so I certainly owe her, Susan and Jennifer, a debt for developing that program and conducting the training for those reviews. Okay. So today I want to talk to you all about the recommendations that we have for our FY20 allocation from HUD. The deadline for applications for this round was pushed back to November 23rd, mainly due to COVID. When we first start talking about doing a grant intake, we usually start in March and April, about this time of year, for the next round. And at that time, you know, COVID breaking. And the last thing that we wanted people to do was to go door to door conducting in-person surveys because no one knew exactly how this disease was how transmissible it was, that sort of thing. And fortunately, we also got some direction from HUD. And instead of doing door-to-door surveys, we were allowed to do mail-in surveys, phone surveys. Some of our contractors got really creative and did SurveyMonkey on people's phones to be able to ascertain the low to moderate income percentage of the project area that the project was going into. We also allowed the use of area-wide statistics for water and sewer line rehabilitation work, but people had to submit to us a pre-qualification form that outlined the project area so that we could actually then go to Google Earth and go down every street to make sure that the neighborhoods that we would be serving if we funded that project were truly, you know, a low to moderate income neighborhood. Now, of course, you can't always say by looking at homes, but, you know, there's certain things that you can tell, and that is if you got a lot of swimming pools and manicured lawns and luxury vehicles in the front yard, they're probably not low to moderate income. So that's the way we looked at low to moderate income percentage this round, and I think it worked pretty well. So we had to delay and take in applications on the 23rd. We received a total of 39 applications. 37 of those were complete and eligible. They requested a total of $70.1 million. We only had $25,831,793 to award. This round, we are also recommending the award of some deobligated funds that we have from fiscal year 15 and 16. We received applications from 28 counties, and if you note, there are 7 applications from Robeson County. It's an area of great need. Perennially, they do fall at the bottom of our counties in terms of wealth. And right now, it looks like we will be recommending about 4 projects in Robeson County. We also wanted to give you a profile of the kind of project that these communities want to pursue. And the most popular project seems to be sewer line rehabilitation, followed by wastewater treatment plant rehabilitation. And the list goes on down. So for this round, we are proposing 2 different scenarios for utilizing funds instead of a single scenario. And in addition to that, we are splitting the funding of these projects between deobligated FY15 and 16 funds and new fiscal year 20 money. In February of this year, HUD released a memo that described a schedule of funding takebacks. And this is something that they had discussed with us at Council of State Community Development Agency meetings. We knew it was coming, but when HUD would talk to us, it was in fairly general terms. It was, well, you have 8 years, is what they said, to expend your funds for any given fiscal year. And what they're doing is they're counting the year that the money comes out, that fiscal year. And unfortunately, in North Carolina, our contract with HUD is not signed typically until the very end of the federal fiscal year. And so we kind of lose time there in having that happen. So what this memo said was that CDBG grant funds not dispersed from the state's line of credit after 8 years will be canceled and recaptured by the U.S. Treasury after the 8th federal fiscal year. This is a U.S. Treasury rule. This is not a HUD rule. And so it's something that HUD can't, you know, wave a magic wand and say, okay, you don't have to give the money back. Treasury is going to take the money. So for the fiscal years 2014 and earlier, those funds are going back to the U.S. Treasury in September of this year. We have some of that money in play. Of course, as Colleen mentioned, the school projects, all of those projects were funded with money that was older than 2014. Unfortunately, we fully expect all 4 of the school projects to be finished by the end of July, early August of this year. And then we have 2 towns that have funding that comes from 2014, the town of Lowell, the town of Rich Square, and both of those projects are on track to expend those funds. And so we will have fully committed the 2014 and earlier funds that we've been allocated over the years, and it will be expended. Then you notice that the 2015 funds will have to go back to Treasury September of next year, and then 2016, September 2023. And that is why we wanted to get the obligated funds from 2015 and 2016 obligated and spent before the Treasury would take those funds back. Okay, so we received 37 eligible applications, and one of the project types that we can do in this program is the extension of water or sewer service, or sometimes both, to occupied homes. And this is kind of different from what other programs can do, because we can actually go up to the home and connect the home to the service. And most infrastructure programs cannot do that, but we can. And anytime that we get those kinds of applications, we will sit down and calculate the cost per connection for you, the authority, because that gives you a sense of the benefit that each homeowner is receiving by getting this connection. And so when we did that with one of the projects that we received, and that is the project in Northampton County, it's project number 11. This project has a very high cost per connection. It's $222,222 per household. This is a project that would extend a 4-inch force main about 8,900 linear feet. Then construct a duplex 80-gallon per minute pump station with odor control, standby power, and SCADA, 1,900 linear feet of 8-inch gravity sewer, 8 manholes, and 9 4-inch service lines, and it will serve 9 homes and 1 church. And the funding request was for $2 million. Now, regarding the need for the project, the need is definitely there. These 9 homes do have failing septic systems. Most of these homes are straight piping gray water. So there is very definitely a need, and all 9 homes are low to moderate income. So it's a 100% low to moderate income project. But it caused us some concern because of that cost per connection. So we are proposing 2 different scenarios. And frankly, these 2 scenarios, depending on what the authority wants to do here, will basically set policy for how we look at the cost per connection in the future, and what we will be able to fund in the future. So, let me give you a little background. I'm sorry. One of the things that I did want to also say about this project is this is the 3rd time that we've seen this project. The first time that we saw it was in 2015, I believe, and at that time the cost estimate ran about $1.1 million, and it was going to sewer 11 homes and the church. Then a couple of years later, we get a second submission, and of course it did not go anywhere that first time. The second time that we received the application the cost went up to $2 million, but this time it was sewering just 9 homes and a church. The 2 other homes I believe, are vacant, or maybe one of them is a over-income home and we can't connect them. But there's been population lost in the project area. So now we have gotten the application a third time, and this is what we're asking you to consider. So scenario one would fund the Northampton County project. It would fully fund project numbers 1 through 14, and it partially funds project numbers 15 and 16 with funding that would allow those projects to prepare to go to construction. That is, it would pay for the cost of the engineering report and the environmental review, and it would provide 60% of the grant administration funding to allow the Fair Housing Plan, the Section 3 plan, the Equal Opportunity Plan, all those plans that Colleen just told you about, to have those plans prepared so that they would then run the life of the project. And of course, once the environmental review document is finished and approved by Jennifer and Susan, then the design and specs can be started. And we would not be funding design and specs in this this planning grant. It would just take those projects to where they could start, getting serious about going to construction. I would also propose that then the construction would be funded off the top of the next appropriation in FY21. So that would be the way that we would propose for the money to go. We're proposing to obligate $743,327 in FY15 funds, $781,017 funds in FY16 funds, and fully obligates our FY20 appropriation for a total award of $27,356,137. And if you see, I've broken out the funding amounts from by fiscal year. Ultimately, we would recommend in scenario one, projects being funded through Bryson City, fully funded for the amount that the applicants requested. And then projects 15 and 16 from Burnsville and Robbinsville would receive the planning grant money that would allow them to prepare to go to construction. The second scenario that we would propose would not fund the Northampton County project. It would fully fund projects number 1 through 10 and 12 through 15, and it would partially fund 16, 18, and 19, and would obligate $774,048 in the FY15 funding, $765,256 in the FY16 funding, and fully obligate our FY20 funds for a total award of $27,371,097. And here you see the projects that we would be able to fund. Full funding through project number 15, town of Burnsville, with the town of Robbinsville, and Maxton would have been already recommended for an award earlier in the priority ranking, so we would skip that one and then recommend funding to the town of Benson and to the town of Enfield to do the planning activities that are required before a project can go to construction. So we did not, because this would be a policy decision, did not want to select one or the other of the scenarios. We would like to hear from the authority what their thinking is with regard to the cost per connection for Northampton County, and how this needs to be considered in the future. And that would be told to us by whichever scenario is proposed for funding. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so are there any questions from anyone for Julie about the agenda item? We definitely need to discuss your feelings on Northampton specifically to kind of lead us of going scenario 1 and 2.
Maria, this is Sharon. I have a question for Julie and maybe some others. What other funding options are there for Northampton County if we don't fund that project? I don't doubt that it's a necessary project.
Yeah. Well, they could go with a USDA grant and loan. They could rethink the way that they want to provide sewer service to this community. One of the things that after the project was turned down the second time that I talked to the applicant about was looking at an on-site system to serve those 9 homes in the church. And in fact, the county did hire a soil scientist who did a review of soil maps. And he located some land on Barrows Mill Road, in fact, that could be suitable for a on-site system. Now, no field work was done, just a map review. And the response was, and I've since seen the numbers, they were not in the application, but they have since, the engineers for the applicant has since sent in cost estimates for installing that kind of system. And in that case, those cost estimates run pretty close to $2 million. There may be other scenarios that the county will want to pursue to reduce this cost. It's just I just think it's just a huge cost for such a small population, and that's balance. How do you best use public dollars?
With an on-site system, even though the initial costs are basically the same, and I understand that you're not talking about that, we don't know for sure that an on-site system would even work. That
right.
What about future O&M costs? Would there be a significant
They would be higher. They would have to have a specialized operator. There would have to be some monitoring of the system, and that was one reason that the county gave for not really wanting to do an on-site system, would be the cost to the sewer treatment provider, which would be, by the way, the town of Jackson.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Julie, can you talk a little bit about the town of Jackson and their capability for operation?
I really have no experience with the town of Jackson. I understand that on the BUR listing, they currently are scored as, I think, a 6. And it could be that, Sharon, you may know more about their finances than I do. But that's all I know about them, is that it's a typical small town. They've got their problems,
Yeah, they're actually missing both their 19 and 20 audits at this point.
Oh man. Okay.
This is Jahan Waller. Are there any other failing septic systems in the general vicinity that could potentially in the future connect on to this?
Not to my knowledge. I've run a Google Earth on this project, and this little group of homes is literally out in the middle of a lot of empty land. You probably know Northampton County is a big agricultural county. Grow a lot of peanuts, and it's just a little row of 9 homes on Barrows Mill Road and a church, and that's it. So that's the problem, because I was thinking the same way you were in terms of, well, can you pick up anybody along the way? And there isn't anybody. There really is not.
And I don't know if we can look at this in this particular form, but by them installing this line, could that potentially spur economic development in the future?
Sure, it could. I mean, sewer lines, water lines can spur economic development. The line would extend from the edge of the town of Jackson and go west. I think it's west, out US 158, and then you turn left and go down Barrows Mill Road. And so you would have, about a mile and a half maybe of sewer line there on US 158 at the edge of the town of Jackson that I guess theoretically, you could have some economic development move in and utilize that sewer line. That being said, that's not the intent of this program, but we know that it happens.
Yeah, this is Ed.
Yeah.
I was going to ask similar question if there's potential addition on customers that could add on, but beyond that, just clarify, we have the county applying for this grant, but you're saying if it went with so does the county own and operate a sewer system that this would connect to?
No, they do not. The county applied because these homes are actually in the county. They're not in the town of Jackson.
So regardless of the solution, whether or not it's a water and sewer extension or a separate on-site sewer system or other on-site technology, either of those would go over to the town of Jackson to own and operate. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have real concern about expending this kind of money on a sewer line extension to handle a pocket of communities. I mean, on-site technology has really boomed in terms of its reliability and sophistication over the last decades, and has a lot of appropriate uses in situations like this where you have a small cluster of homes or a school or some other community infrastructure that's remotely located. And I certainly lean more towards having a decentralized system rather than trying to tie them in with a centralized system. But it sounds like in either case, we have a utility that could be on our other list in the future in terms of being a distressed utility. So I'm concerned about, on one end, we're concerned about distressed utilities and how do we get them out of being distressed. And here we are talking about expending tens of millions of dollars to serve 9 homes. That's going to add little to no revenue to this community system. I'm looking for a more innovative solution. That doesn't sound like a win for anyone in this regard.
Ms. Bernadette. I remember we had something a while back where the cost per connection was lower, and I remember I voted for it with great reservation. Because in this case here, I don't know, obviously it's all based on the income of individuals and not certainly on the value of the homes, but I would suspect that the $200,000 cost per connection may actually be higher than the value of the homes. And I have very serious concerns about that. I'm sorry, somebody, you were responding?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. I've gone to the real estate records in Northampton County, and these are nice, modest little homes on half-acre lots.
Okay, and and also, I looked up the town. I mean, the overall population is a little over about 500 people, and they've been losing population. So, that's also just a very concerning thing about spending that kind of money for just a few homes.
Okay, and I think Leela has her hand raised also.
Yes, I would agree with everything that everyone has said so far, and clearly it's a situation that needs some resolution. So I guess I'm wondering what our other options are. I honestly would see this as a great case study for us to look at how to help a community like this. And I just did a quick Google. You can buy a high capacity composting toilet from Home Depot for $3,000 that says it serves 6 to 9 people and only needs to be serviced or emptied maybe once a quarter or even once a year if it's seasonal use. So we could, you could even do that as a temporary solution while you look at alternatives, or you could probably pay somebody to do the service for a really long time for $2 million on 9 homes and a church. So I just think we really, really need to look at decentralizing and think outside the box, because this is the exact kind of situation. It's a really small number of properties, and there should be a lot of other options before you spend $2 million to hook them into another small system and create a maintenance nightmare that we'll be talking about again in 20 years.
Yeah.
And Julie, can I ask? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, something that you said at the introduction was, if we did decide that this cost per customer connection is too high, that it in turn sort of sets the precedent and the policy for how we go forward. Are we comfortable at saying what that threshold is? Or, I mean, I'm curious about your thoughts further on what you said.
I don't know that I'm really comfortable about suggesting a number or a threshold, but clearly, and it may be a case-by-case basis that the authority will need to deal with this, depending on the solution that's being proposed and the numbers and that sort of thing. It's just simply that it just looked like we were creating a problem, and then the cost was just huge.
Right.
And I mean, we already know. I don't know. You remember probably, Maria, the
Terrell
County. Yeah, the Terrell County project. That cost per connection was $176,000, and there we ran 11 miles of force main and installed a duplex pump station to sewer 17 homes. And frankly, it was really early in the program. We should have had this conversation then, but we didn't. Again, the need there was tremendous, but we think that there may have been another solution that would have been much more
yes.
cost.
Yes.
So this is Leela again. I guess I want to go back to, I know CDBG funds are more limited and we have maybe less discretion on how we spend those funds. What options do we have to try to help this community find a solution and as an alternative to funding the project that they've requested?
Okay, if we're talking about the composting toilets, I think what actually would restrict us there is the legislation that pulled the money over to DEQ in the first place, because there the legislature was interested in funding publicly owned infrastructure and not privately owned. Now, CDBG would allow us to put in a composting toilet situation. It would allow us to expand the drain field. So we could do that with CDBG funds, but we're a little restricted by the state legislation.
Well, so I'm not talking specifically about that technology, I guess, but just even studying, and I know we don't want a year-long study to do this either, but what options do we have to actually fund a concerted look at this and coming up with a solution and then helping to find funding, even if it's not CDBG? Can we use planning funds? Can we suggest that they modify the planning approach to do an alternatives analysis? And again, this doesn't need to be a $100,000 engineering study, but what are our options for just moving forward to help solve the problem? Not necessarily, I mean, I just came up with the composting toilet thing because I thought surely one could do something a lot cheaper than $2 million.
Yeah. Well, I think we certainly could fund a training, or not training, I keep calling it training, planning grant that would allow a study to be done for this community to determine what the best option would be. It would be a little bit outside of what we've done in the past. It would be a new program. We would probably have to go through an amendment to the annual action plan, a public hearing. What else, Colleen?
Well, Julie, I mean, wouldn't it fit under the MRF program beautifully? I mean,
yes,
because that's what we're
yeah,
looking at.
Amy is shaking her head yes.
Yay, thank you, Amy.
Yeah, and that's what I meant when I say we. I don't necessarily mean just CDBG. I mean, as a state and with all of the options available to us as an authority, what options do we have to try to provide some kind of alternate solution than what they've asked for?
Right. And that's where I see the MRF, program really being founded is here's some options, but what is a really deep dive on alternatives analysis?
You want to say something? Well, Amy is still shaking her head. Yes.
Yes.
So it sounds like she's open to that possibility.
Okay.
And certainly this is Leila again. When I was on the Wake County Human Services Board, we talked about septic systems a lot. And to me, that's a peeve of mine that counties are responsible for wastewater treatment for non-centralized systems in their whole jurisdiction. And I think this is, again, a perfect time to have a conversation for a county to step up and say, okay, here's a place where this is not working, and it's our responsibility to figure out how to make, and it might be on-site individually owned system still, but it's a perfect thing where it does need to be the county. So I guess as long as it fits under the MRF, and I don't know that Jackson even needs to be involved. They can certainly be at the table, but it really is the county's responsibility to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I will say, this is Amy, the MRF program would require somebody to at least be at the table. So, and it would make sense that this type of study should consider as an option what's being proposed in this application. I mean, it shouldn't go very far because for the very reasons you've discussed. But we would need one partner. I mean, it wouldn't have to be Jackson. It could be, I don't know, somebody. But there would need to be at least one partner for an MRF. But I think that could be handled very easily.
Okay. Before we move forward to entertain a motion, does anybody else have any other discussion or questions for Julie or Amy or?
Yeah, this is Ed. I just wanted to follow up on Layla's comments. I couldn't agree more. I think this is an absolute opportunity to look at an alternative solution. We're not dealing with a community that has any history of running a utility system. This is, a small town in a rural county. And I really think we need to show them there are other alternatives and lead them to doing the right kind of study to identify, a more creative solution that's going to save them money, save us money, and use the state resources a little more wisely. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any further discussion before we possibly entertain a motion? Okay, do we have a motion on scenario 1 versus scenario 2 for funding recommendations?
This is Leila. I would move to approve scenario 2 as presented by staff.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
This is Ed. I'll second that.
Okay, great. All right, so we have a motion and a second for scenario 2 as presented. Is there any further discussion before we do a roll call on the vote?
This is Leila. I don't think it needs to be a part of the motion at all, but can we include a direction for staff to reach out and try to figure out another way forward?
I would say that could be direction without being included in the motion for sure.
Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right. So if we'll go down the roll call, taking Leila and Ed's motions as yes votes. Melody?
Aye.
Sharon?
Aye.
Myself, I vote yes. Bernadette?
Yes.
Jahan?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds like we are unanimous, so that motion carries. All right, so Julie, is there anything further on this agenda item that you need?
No, I think we're good. Thank you all very much for the discussion. I think it's been a really good discussion, and it's one that I think is going to allow for some good collaboration between MRF and CDBG, and I think this will be a really good situation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we definitely got to the right place there. So according to the agenda, we are scheduled for a break, and I'm getting horrible feedback.
This is Ed again. Then, do we have consensus of the board in terms of direction to staff and looking at how to fund an alternatives analysis for this community? Or do you need a motion in that regard?
I would say, I don't know. What do we need?
I mean, if we have consensus of the board in that direction, I'm not sure we need a motion, but I think we need to make sure we have consensus.
Okay. Is there any dissenting opinion on that?
No, this is Leila. I think that's great. And I guess my question would be, do we have the ability to approve in advance a grant application that staff might receive? Or could you bring that to the next meeting? I guess I don't want to put them on hold until like the next funding round. Again, given that this could be kind of a pilot project. So just what's the most expeditious way for us to move forward, and what would staff need from us to be able to do that?
Okay, how about this? Since we're running up against a break and we'll have 15 minutes, maybe Amy could, or between Amy and Julie and Kim and those that are in John that are in the room maybe together, they could maybe think about the scenario that would be the bit like what our options are. And then when Amy comes up, maybe on agenda item H, that we could talk about it then. Are y'all comfortable with that? I mean, we won't leave the meeting at the end without it having a plan of direction. Would that be suitable?
Sounds
To the-
good.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Any dissent on that? Okay. All right. So it's 10:30. We'll take a break till 10:45, and then Kim will come back. I will relinquish the chair seat, and we'll get started back at 10:45. Am I missing anything? No. Okay. We'll see everybody back at 10:45.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
And start with, or before we start with agenda item G, going back, I did listen in to agenda item F and that discussion. Staff did discuss this during the break a little bit. We will definitely reach out to the county and investigate the possibility of them putting together a merger regionalization feasibility grant application, but not just to have them submit an application, but work with them to really kind of define what the scope needs to be to address some of the issues that the authority discussed today, and make sure that scope is laid out clearly. And then once the budget is passed and we have additional state grant dollars available to us, assuming our recurring amount continues, we then could potentially award that MRF before the next funding round out of the normal funding cycle. If the authority is comfortable with that, I certainly feel that's within your purview. Any thoughts on that?
Sounds great. This is Leila.
I'm in
Okay.
agreement too.
Yeah, this is Ed. I'd support that. Is there do you have enough direction from the board now? Are you comfortable with where we are that would allow you to move forward then?
I'm very comfortable with that, and that we can put together something that I think will make sense for everybody, for the county, to really investigate the different decentralized options that are available. And I think there's other resources we can bring into that discussion to make sure the scope and that study is as clear as possible. We have a working relationship with our on-site wastewater section, and we can consult those folks as well.
All right, great.
Hopefully,
Amy?
this is Leila. I was just going to say, hopefully the county will be receptive and eager to help look at this, because I really do see it as an opportunity for us to look at this in a way we've kind of skirted around and talked about for years now.
Yeah, I hope so. And we'll definitely reach out to the county and engage their interest, and definitely work with them should they would be willing to investigate this. Okay, I don't hear any further comments. And so with that, we will go ahead and move along to agenda item G, request to go to public review with priority systems. And with that, John Rusgaard. John, take it away.
All right, thanks, Kim. And just real quick, a plug for the next authority meeting is we've been working with DHHS staff on a potential pilot program to look to using the SRF funds to support on-site wastewater systems. we're scheduled to bring that to you in the July meeting, just kind of as an overview of some of the work that's been done up until this point. So I think that was very timely to bring that up as well. Okay, so this is an action item with a recommendation to take our priority point system to public review. And this is part of updates to our intended use plan. I've talked about this in the most previous meeting as well, to kind of lay the framework for this agenda item, and another one on the affordability criteria. So I won't spend a lot of time on this slide for either presentation, but basically we're required to update our intended use plan as part of the SRF CAP grant. The priority point system is part of that IUP for the SRF program, and the priority point system is also the same one we use for the state reserve program, so it's used in multiple places. Currently, there are no recommendations to change the priority rating system. We did, staff feel that the current system does an excellent job at supporting the authority's master plan by identifying and prioritizing projects to support viability. Staff feel that the existing system synchronizes well with the Developing Viable Utility Program and funds available through the Viable Utility Reserve. Specifically, we feel that the existing priority point systems do an excellent job balancing the priorities that include project purpose and benefits, system management, and the need for utilities for financial assistance using the affordability criteria. Staff feel that the current system results in a prioritization that identifies highly beneficial projects for funding, while also lifting up those utilities and those projects that need financial support. Some examples of this that I think are noteworthy: the current system provides the highest priority for projects that resolve non-viable systems. The current system recognizes the importance of implementing asset management plans and capital improvement plans to better meet the short-term and long-term needs of the systems. Third, the existing systems provide additional prioritization for systems that maintain an operating ratio greater than 1, while the affordability criteria limits grants and principal forgiveness to those with a future operating ratio of less than 1.3. This, we feel, strikes a really good balance in prioritizing funding to projects with communities that are taking the efforts to ensure that they have revenues to meet or at least match expenditures, while also focusing grant and principal forgiveness assistance to those that may struggle to meet the increased expenses for that project. The priority point system works well with the affordability criteria. Talked about this a little bit already in determining the grant and principal forgiveness eligibility. We feel the priority point system as is, really does a good job of ensuring funding considerations are made in a priority order. And then you lay on top of that the affordability criteria and calculations, which is in evaluating the need of that community for financial assistance. And together, we feel they do a very good job of prioritizing projects and funding those most in need. The affordability criteria is an agenda item, I believe it's agenda item I. We'll be getting to that later in more detail. There are some changes there, but again, we do not have any recommended changes to the existing priority rating system. So our recommendation is to approve for public review the priority rating system with no changes. We would bring the final recommendations to you in July, where we'd have an opportunity to review any public comment that we received and make any additional changes if necessary.
Okay, thank you, John. Any questions for John? I certainly think there's, from a staff standpoint, an interest in hearing from the authority if they feel like the existing priority system is adequate and is working well. It does address those viable utilities like we think it does. Any questions, thoughts on that? Hearing none, do we have a motion to move to public review for the existing priority rating system?
This is Maria. I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Jahan. You have a second?
We have a second. Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go through a roll call vote. Melody, are you still on?
Aye.
Thank you, Melody.
You're welcome.
Just for the record, Melody had sent me a chat that she was going to have to drop off at 11 for a little bit. So I just wanted to make sure she was still on. Sharon?
Aye.
Leela?
Aye.
Ed?
Aye.
Bernadette?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Motion passes. And we will now move on to agenda item H, the draft asset inventory and assessment priority point system. And with that, Amy, take it away.
Okay. We have had a lot of internal discussion about this and whether we wanted to do anything with this or not. And that's based on the fact the existing asset inventory and assessment priority system is set up really, the most points come out of the system management, and that was intentionally done in the beginning because everyone wanted the products from these type grants to be used and not just something that would sit on a shelf somewhere. And we felt like that the system management areas would provide that indication. And so as a general rule, the units that score assessment scores that could lead them to be in designated distress don't naturally get prioritized high enough to get these grants. Now, in February, there were some that were approved for funding, and those situations are when the units are partnering with a county or a COG to maintain their data, and they're bringing in other people if they don't have their own asset management experience to be the team. And so that's how those get funded. But having said that, we realized that there is a benefit to units if with the current limited funding for VUR, we do want to be able to continue to fund distressed units when they do score high enough. And so there is a benefit, and so what we're suggesting is to put out for public review is to add a line item to the benefit section that would give 2 points if the unit of the applicant is willing to become part of the process, to participate in the process. And to be honest, this line item is slightly vague because we're still trying to figure out what exactly that would mean. But it would be some kind of resolution. We're just still working on what they would actually be resolving to do specifically. Obviously, it would be to do the requirements of the Viable Utility Program. This would not add any additional points. It would just be 2 points out of the up to 8 benefit points. And benefit points are very difficult to obtain. So we felt like that would be a good approach to this. So that's what we're recommending to be put out for public review on the AIA system. So for the MRF system, these are a little bit different in terms of we absolutely think that distressed units should be funded with an MRF if they're not already being funded out of VUR. And so there was no problem adjusting well, problem's not the right word, but it was very easy to make an adjustment to the MRF. And the other thing that made it very easy to make a recommendation is that LGC is no longer going to be sending out letters to designate units, letters to, unit, what is that letter, Sharon?
We're gonna, starting with this, the 2021 fiscal year, we're gonna change the way we're communicating with units about items of concern in their audit. Right now, the process is that they send in the audit, we look at it, we draft up a letter of our concerns, send it back to them, and then they have to respond to us. But we're really putting it back on the unit and the auditor, so that the auditor is going to be required to present the audit to the governing board, and they're going to be required to review any findings in the audit and what we're calling financial indicators of distress, which those will be calculated for them when they submit the audit into our portal. But the auditor is going to be required to go through those with the governing board. And then the unit will be sending us a corrective action plan. So we're just cutting out our letter to them. And hopefully that'll streamline the process.
Thank you, Sharon. And so, I mean, we could still do something along those lines, but it seemed like this was an easy place to, instead of awarding points for the unit letter, is if they have been designated as distressed through the process. And in this case, they would not have to do a resolution. It would just be if they were included in the units that have been designated distressed. So we're recommending that line item that used to be the unit letter now be that they've been designated distressed. And then the other two minor changes is changing the name of categories 1 and 2 to be consistent with the other programs, including the AIA. So just changing it to project benefits and system management. So those are the two recommendations to go out for public review.
Any questions for Amy? Hearing none, do we have a motion for this to go to public review?
This is Bernadette. I move.
Thank you, Bernadette. Do we have a second?
This is Ed. I'll second that.
Thank you, Ed. Any questions or further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to roll call vote. Melody, do you happen to be there, or have you already stepped out? Of course, you can't answer that question if you have. We'll assume she stepped out. Sharon?
Aye.
Leela?
Aye.
Maria?
Aye.
Juhan?
Aye.
Thank you all. Motion passes. And with that, we will move along to the draft provisions to the affordability criteria. And with that, John, take it away.
All right, thank you. So this is a second action item that will be requesting information to go to public review. Similarly to the priority point system, the affordability criteria is part of the intended use plan, for which we have to do an annual update. So the existing, also I presented a lot of similar information in the March meeting. I will go over that information a little more quickly this time so that we can concentrate on some of the updated information since the March meeting based on your comments and suggestions as part of that meeting. So the existing affordability criteria is 4 steps, 4 elements. The first 3 of those steps or elements are really criteria that determine whether or not the project or the community is eligible for grant or principal forgiveness. It's not until the 4th step, the monthly bill to project cost comparison evaluation, where the actual grant or principal forgiveness percent eligibilities are determined, and that's where the majority of the recommended changes that I'm going to talk about today lie. So to give a little bit more detail on how that is set up, this figure shows something we refer to as the affordability matrix. And what it does is it looks at different ranges or buckets of water or sewer monthly bill per 5,000 gallons on the y-axis and project cost per connection on the x-axis. If either the monthly bill or the project cost connection are over the state median, they become eligible for 25% principal forgiveness or grant. And then as either the rates increase or the cost per connection increase, there's an opportunity to move up to a greater grant or principal forgiveness percentage. The values that were used to determine these ranges and buckets were from 2015, so there was a need to update, at the very least, to update the data set used and recalculate these ranges. Staff made a number of observations during our review of the affordability criteria. This is a slide I've shown you before. There were no recommended changes to steps 1, 2, or 3. The population threshold seems appropriate. Step 2, looking at local government unit indicators, that seems appropriate still. We're able to update those values annually. And step 3, looking at the operating ratio threshold, we felt that remained appropriate for the criteria. For step 4, we did, as I mentioned before, there is a need to use more updated data to assure that those ranges are reflective of current rates and current cost per connection if we continue to use cost per connection. Some additional observations were that the drinking water SRF program was routinely struggling to meet the minimum principal forgiveness requirements that are part of that federal grant. So we wanted to evaluate why that was happening and to see if there was any recommended changes to help address that. And then another observation, and this is a new one since March, was that there's a possibility for local government units designated as distressed to not meet the affordability criteria, steps 1 through 3, and not even enter into the eligibility calculation for our other funding sources. And we wanted to evaluate that, to, again, see if there was changes or recommended changes that we could make to better allow distressed units access to grants and principal forgiveness funds. I've shown this slide before. One of the first things we did is we looked at the different rate distributions for drinking water billings and compared that to what the rates are for wastewater services, and also compared that to what we were currently using for the different ranges to calculate grant principal forgiveness eligibility. So the middle column, labeled DW and WW wastewater, those are the ranges that are currently in the affordability matrix. And when that was calculated, we took all of the different rates, regardless if it was a single utility provider or if both services were provided, and we put them all into one data set and calculated the percent distribution and the different ranges. We redid that using just the drinking water data set and just the wastewater data set, and the table supports that the drinking water rates are lower on average than those providing wastewater services. And as a result, the drinking water systems were less likely to reach thresholds for the different grant principal forgiveness eligibilities, and we're getting awarded less of grant or principal forgiveness percentage eligibility. So we wanted to address that. We decided we wanted to start looking at a combined rate and to see what impact that would have on grant principal forgiveness eligibility. So we took data from fall of 2016 to the spring of 2020 and recalculated it. We calculated eligibility based on a combined rate structure We considered grant and principal forgiveness caps that are already established. And when we did that, we found that the grant principal forgiveness eligibility for drinking water systems would have increased by 12.9%, just under 13%, while the eligibility for wastewater applications would have decreased by 6.4%. In the staff report that you have, both of these, there's a figure for both drinking water and wastewater systems or applications. I only show for the presentation the drinking water systems. And what this figure shows is two stacked bar graphs. The graph on the left shows the current method and the different number of projects that would have fallen into those different categories of grant principal forgiveness eligibility. So 22 projects were not eligible, 39 would have been eligible for 25%, et cetera, for a total of $26.6 million of grant principal forgiveness eligibility. When we looked at the combined rate structure, we see an increase in the total amount of eligibility and an increase in the number of projects that would have been eligible for those greater percent principal forgiveness. So it's going to bump up those drinking water projects for additional eligibility and put them, we feel, more on equal footing with the wastewater projects. Take a quick break to see if you have any questions at this time. Okay.
This is Ed. At our last meeting, we had a lot of discussion around this and in terms of trying to develop criteria that you could automatically update instead of using hard numbers, talking about percent, talking about using the median rate. So you didn't have to go back every year and ask us to update what those rates actually are, as compared to right now using it's hard cast as 1950 rate information. Is that reflected in your final recommendations here?
The final recommendation will be to go to public review with this information. It's not a specific part of the requirement. I think the decision point would be to adopt the methodology of using the percent distribution thresholds. And those were here, the 50%, 70%, 85%, and 95%, adopting that methodology instead of the actual rates.
Okay.
So that on a yearly basis, when we have the rate data available for us for that previous year or the most recent data, then we can update the utility rates.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next step we did was keep in mind that this data and evaluation is looking at the 2015 rate data and what the impacts would have been to the historical projects. So going from here, we then needed to see what the rates would be or the impacts of going from 2015 to more recent 2020 data. And that's what this shows. The combined monthly bill thresholds for 50 percentile came out to $68 in 2015. It goes up significantly, $79 using the 2020 data. And you see similar jumps across the board for the different thresholds. Another question that was brought up was, what about those single utility providers that we recognize likely have higher costs because they can't distribute those costs over both programs. As a result, they have higher monthly utility bills. And how do we make sure that they're being treated in an equitable manner and are being considered as we're developing these tools for grant principal forgiveness eligibility? So you asked us to go back and look at them in particular, and that's a lot of what this figure shows. It shows this using the same percentage or the percentiles of bills that we, what would be the rate for a single provider versus using the combined utility provider. There's a lot of numbers, and it's a little hard to get your head around everything, but there's two basic scenarios here. There's a water monthly bill, and then we looked at the wastewater monthly bills, the water being more to the left. And so what it shows is for a combined utility provider, the 50th percentile rate is $35, while for a single provider it's $42. We expected it to be higher. And so what I think this shows is that for those single utility providers, they already have a higher rate, and using the combined rate system, they're not being held at a disadvantage when we would compare their rate to a combined utility rate, provided that there's a calculation or a factor that we use to bring them into that combined rate system. We had previously recommended that's 40 and 60% value, and I'll get into that in a slide or two. But what we feel the key to this slide is we did this evaluation, and using the recommended system, which I'll get into later, does not put these single utility providers at a disadvantage for grant and principal forgiveness eligibility. And hopefully I can show you that a little bit more clearly in a minute or two.
Hey, John, John, this is Maria.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Go back, yeah, on that one. Okay, just let me make sure that I'm understanding. Okay, so we saw the 2015 data, and we're looking at this column on the left. So what you're, make sure I'm understanding, what you're showing is that half of the utilities that are included in this information, if they're a single water provider, because that's the land I live in, half of the utilities have a 5,000 gallon bill of $42 or less.
Yes. Of 123 single use
Of the
drinking water.
123. Wow. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure. I mean, those numbers are a lot higher than I thought, honestly, than I thought they would be. But okay.
Yeah, I think that's not as much of a concern for the drinking water data, but we definitely had a little bit of a concern with the wastewater data, having only 43 data points to look at. Of how confident are we that that truly is representative data set.
Well, and what I'll say is, which we've talked about before, it's also clear that a wastewater utilities rates needs to be higher than the water. I mean, it is more expensive to treat. So it would be awful if what we saw was that the wastewater rates were collectively were less than what the water rates were.
Yeah, and Maria, I think too, these updated rates reflect what we're seeing also in the updated needs numbers that the Environmental Finance Center provided. The cost is going up, we understand the needs more, and that's going to result in higher rates.
But, and I've said it before, in talking about the ability of an authority like mine that doesn't have to deal with everything else, being able to raise rates higher. So on kind of the negative side, you look at I'm pointing to my screen like you can see it. The water single provider rate is higher than the wastewater combined utility. So that's not, that $41 is not the water and wastewater combined, but that's
the wastewater portion of their bill.
That's the wastewater portion, which is less. So if they have water and sewer, the wastewater portion is less than what a single provider water utility is charging. Which again, I mean, I know it's not apples to apples, obviously, with, you know, 387 compared to 123, but that's just, this is a fascinating like data set to me. Okay, we can move on.
Okay, another thing, well,
I'm
so,
sorry, this is Leila. I'm not ready to leave this yet either. So I know we talked about this before. So I'm curious, when you say the N equals 43 may not be representative, I guess so it is absolutely representative. It may be highly variable. So I'm curious, I mean, I think what I'm hearing and what we discussed is, do we have enough of a sample set to use a statistic from that sample set in our calculations? So, I mean, the 43 providers we have and their data are their data. So it's not that the 43 isn't representative, it's that it's a relatively small number and it may not be very uniform. And so applying a statistic from that may or may not give us the result we want.
Yeah, thank you, Leila. That's how I should have said.
But I would argue that as you go forward with your presentation, that using a calculation based on whatever their rates are out of those for those 43 is not any better, because they're still variable. They're whatever, you know, their rates are their rates, and some of them might be 35 and some of them might be 75, and that's not going to change the result. So that's sort of a leading comment to say I'm still not necessarily in favor of a formula when we have data, and we could just use data. So carry on.
Okay, so sticking with the premise of the use of a combined utility bill to calculate affordability, estimate affordability, and calculate a grant principal forgiveness eligibility. In the previous presentation, we looked at data, but we didn't provide any evaluation for you to see. And we had proposed the 60-40 split of utility rates without enough evidence to really support those conclusions or those recommendations. So you asked for that data. This is the graphical representation of the utility bills for combined systems. So on the x-axis is the combined monthly utility bill for 5,000 gallons, and on the y-axis is the individual utility bill, whether it's water or wastewater. The blue dots are the drinking water portion of the bill, and the brownish dots are the wastewater rates. So this is only those systems that are combined utility. And the idea is there, does it show a consistent or a statistical difference between the drinking water and the wastewater related to the combined monthly bill? So I think looking just at the color distribution, as you'd expect, the drinking water bills are lower than the wastewater bills. It's not definite. There's some higher blue dots, but very little. But we weren't expecting that anyways. The trend lines is what we found out to be so interesting. The slopes of those came out very exact, 0.4 and 0.6. And then they almost crossed the zero XY axis as well, which again, we were a little surprised with, pleasantly surprised. But the trend lines to us really support using something other than maybe just doubling the rate for a single utility provider and using that to compare to the combined rates for those systems that do both. We felt that keeping with this 60% adjustment, 40% adjustment for drinking water and wastewater seems more appropriate, especially for the wastewater systems that would jump up even higher and be great, even more eligible for grant or principal forgiveness, maybe leaving behind those drinking water systems that are single utility providers. So using those slope factors, it would bump up those drinking water applications to, we feel, more equitable standing with and more reflective of the potential actual bill than just doubling their rates.
So let me take a second here and ask Leela, did you have another question, or is your hand raised from previously?
Oh, sorry, I didn't unraise.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Okay. And that's a reiteration of what I just went over. Leila, I'm about to move on to another topic, so I think I should pause again and see what other discussion you'd like to have potentially on this.
I guess I feel like, well, so the first question I have is, as we're discussing this agenda item, is the way that people calculate their rates part of what gets put out for public review, or is that part of the staff guidance? So if we're talking about a formula or how we use the formula, so I guess how much discretion do we still have to refine exactly how we look at the rates before it goes out for public review?
I think we have a lot of flexibility with what we take out to public review.
I agree. And Leila, really the only formula is just a multiplier for the single providers to put them into the range for as we look at combined bills. So you're still looking at the monthly bill, still looking at the matrix, and the bill is what the bill is. For single providers, you would just multiply that bill to get them into the combined rate matrix.
Okay. And so I get that. And maybe this is just because, I think data analysis is fun. So I apologize, but in advance. But I guess I'm not completely satisfied that just using a single multiplier gets us any closer. So for example, looking at the table that you have up right now, if I just look at waste, so for water, for instance, in my 123 is a pretty big sample size. Like, to me, we could just use the percentile. And so I'm going to back up a little bit. First of all, I think we talked about this last time. If we can use the percentile is what we approve, and then we update it. And maybe it's not every year. I don't know how much staff effort it is to update it annually, but at least every other year, then we don't have to approve. Then the $35 and the $42 isn't what's being approved. It's the 50 percentile, 70 percentile.
Right.
And it just automatically gets updated.
Right.
So that's the first thing.
That's something we can definitely go out to public review, and can be part of the motion is to go out with that. And, staff can specifically, when we publish this, specifically ask for input on that item.
Okay. So when I look at the water, for instance, that is a pretty big sample size. And so to me, we can just use the percentiles for the day, just use the, there's no reason to convert it using a formula, because I get that you have the two lines on the graph, but there's a lot of scatter in those graphs. So that's just adding more uncertainty to the single providers, or it's adding more variability to the single provider's bill they submit based on a bunch of other people's data, as opposed to them just submitting that their bill is $45 and therefore they are between the 50th and the 70th percentile. Wastewater, I get that it's a little more, it's a smaller sample size, but I would be interested in looking at that closer. So I guess I'm still just sticking with, I would rather see, as you interpret each year, I'd rather just see the table be just like it is shown right here and use those numbers. And one of the observations, for instance, on wastewater is if you look at those two right columns, and I just looked at how much higher is the single provider than the combined provider. And so I took 55 divided by 41, 63 by 47. So for the two smaller percentiles, they're 34% higher, but then when you get to the higher numbers, they're only 20% high, 20% and 19% respectively. So it isn't a uniform application. Like the higher the bills go, the closer they are to the combined. And so I'm just, so I'll just leave that there. I'm more in favor of calculating the 4 columns the way you see them here and using that.
So Layla, one of the reasons why we moved away from that was when we felt that put those single providers at a disadvantage for getting grant or principal forgiveness, since their thresholds for rates were higher than those for combined systems. So to us, it seemed to make it more difficult for them to become eligible.
Well, I guess it depends. Or you could say because their rates are higher, as they maybe are having to recover more of their costs already, they shouldn't necessarily be rewarded by getting grants at lower levels. Don't it? I mean, that comes back to the philosophy of the affordability is basing it on if a single provider wastewater, for example, if their rates are $60, then yeah, if they were combined utility, they would be in between the 85th and 95th percentile. But for single providers, that's not unusual. So I guess that's, whether you call it rewarding or penalizing, it's saying if you're if you are a single provider for water or wastewater, your rates tend to be higher. And do you get considered for rates along with that group? Or if we're going to say that we should, if we want to consider everybody equally, then why separate or why have a formula at all? Just look at water and wastewater independently and combine the statistics. So even if they're combined utility provider, and again, I'm thinking out loud, even if they're combined utility provider, if they submit on a water project, then we look at their water rate, not their combined rate. If they submit on a wastewater, and we could combine the statistics for all of the providers, whether they're combined or single, and look at water wastewater separately. So I'm not going to belabor this because in the end, I think it's like everything else we do. You guys have done a good job analyzing the data, and we need an approach that's easy to understand, and we can always revisit it later. I just feel like when we put a formula on top of things, it just adds a level of manipulation that maybe isn't needed.
So, Leela, I want to make sure I understand, and I'm willing to move on, but I just want to make sure I understand what you originally advocated for. When looking at the single providers, we would look at them in the context of the combined providers and their specific water bill, and the single provider's water bill as one data set, or would we apply the percentiles to each individual data set? Because to me, that's where the difference is whether that makes it more difficult because you have higher rates or less difficult because you're in a bigger data set.
Originally, I guess my thought was that we were headed down this path because we felt like we should recognize that the single providers probably have higher rates already than the combined utility providers. And so my original kind of understanding was that and if we treat them all, if we lump them all together, then what that's doing is making it easier for a single provider to get a grant.
Right.
Because their rates are already higher. So if we say, well, we want to maybe separate that out. So I got a little confused then about that's a philosophical discussion that I think wasn't necessarily part of this path we started down with the data analysis, which is should single providers be more eligible for grant money because their rates tend to be higher than the state averages? Or should they be considered as a group and they should be able to function, and we know their rates are going to be higher and that's just a fact of life, and they should be eligible according to the same percentile in their group as combined utilities? And so that's a different philosophical question than how you do the calculations.
Right.
So this is Ed. If it's timely, I'd like to jump in on this also, but Kim, if you have a response or.
No, go ahead, Ed.
So I really appreciate the discussion. I appreciate putting this out because I was having trouble wrapping my head around this also. But as I've listened to Layla on this, I was very supportive of where she was, and I think I proffered the same thing in our last meeting that why don't we have 4 different categories, and I'm flipping my thinking here and going, well, it's really not about the utility and their rate, it's about the impact to the customer. And what we're saying here is that if a customer happens to be served by a single provider utility, they're already being penalized. There's already an inefficiency in their utility service provider just because of the way their system's structured, and they have a single water or a separate sewer, and they're not getting the benefit that a combined system provider would give them. So if we treat them as 4 separate categories, I'm starting to think we're penalizing those citizens that are already paying a higher rate because they happen to live in a community that has 2 separate utility service providers. So I've gotten more comfortable with what you're proposing, where at our last meeting, I was more about, well, maybe we need to treat these individually, but I think it's about the citizen and the rate they're paying, and how does that compare to the global statewide criteria rather than just the criteria for a single provider or a combined provider.
Yeah, so I'll make a comment on that, and this is the same comment I was going to make with respect to what Leila was talking about too. Where this really started was the idea that instead of looking at wastewater bills and water bills separately, like we did with the original affordability criteria, and to some degree, we did it that way to avoid all of this wrangling and the difficulties that it generates. But the idea was the citizen sees a combined bill in most cases. You know, obviously there's a lot more combined utilities than single providers. They don't see, you know, their water bill is this part of the bill and their sewer bill is this part of the bill. They see a combined bill. They're writing out that one check. And so from that perspective, we said, well, let's look at the affordability criteria with respect to combined utilities, which a combined bill, I should say, which then generates the question, well, how do you, I don't know what the right word is, maybe normalize the single provider bill? And just because they're a single provider, it doesn't mean they're not also paying the different utility a different bill, which may be higher or maybe lower in some cases as well. So that's where the formula comes in, is how do you kind of bring the single providers into the combined bill arena? So that's kind of, these are some of the same struggles we had as staff as to what to recommend, but it really started with the customer is the perspective we wanted to keep in mind, and they see a bill.
So having said all of that, this is Leela. I'll just say I'm fine with going forward with staff's recommendation because it's just not, there's no perfect way to do it. And we're always going to be, as we should be, evaluating whether we're getting the results we intend.
Are we ready to move on? Maria, it looks like you're getting ready to say something.
Yes. So I guess what I have seen, like on my personal experience as a single utility provider, like I think it can go both ways. If you like, so Leela was saying, like, use the actual rates, and this is going to stray from what she's saying, but so like our situation with the town of Spindale and the town of Rutherfordton and Cliffside Sanitary. So we bill for them. So if I had a project in the Cliffside area and I'm going to use the bill that the customer actually sees from a funding scenario, if we're trying to determine my affordability, that really is what that customer is seeing, because there is an actual rate, even though it's not mine. But then if it works for me, great. But if it doesn't work for me and I don't want to be held responsible for that sewer entity's rates, even though that is what my base sees. And so I think, I'm on the same path. This may not be perfect, but it is a way forward, because I'm only going to like it if it works for me, and I don't like it if it works against me. And so, like, if you're really looking at what's fair and what is reflective, I think you're absolutely right. My customers see water, sewer, and sanitation, and half of that money is not Broad River's money. It's other towns' money, but that's still the bill they're seeing. So I don't know that added anything, but I think the staff recommendation is the way that I would like to see it.
Thank you, Maria. And Sharon, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, number one, I agree with what Leland and Maria both said, but when we work with particularly some of the troubled units, and we experienced this in Pikeville Monday night, the customers come up to you and say, look how much my bill is. They don't differentiate, just as Maria said, between water, sewer, electric, and trash, which is, they have all four things in Pikeville. But the other thing that we often hear from people that provide both water and sewer is that they make money on water and they lose money on sewer, but as long as they come out okay together, they're fine with that. And they look at it as one service. So,
but Sharon, also
it muddies the waters a little bit, I think, on the rates when you look at the individual rates for people that provide those services.
It does, but it also, and this is a bigger picture of it, but it also impacts, like, if my water rate, because I am, a single utility, and I want to say that I charge what it costs, and the towns next door to me are looking at, okay, what are my citizens paying? And if my water rate is $15 higher than their sewer rate, which that doesn't reflect the cost, but still, like that comment's been said, people speak with their feet. So when it gets too expensive to live in that area, then they leave. And the town's not responsible for my water rate. But if I'm impeding them raising their rates where they need to be because my water rate is higher, like, it has to be, I don't know, this is a whole different philosophical question, but it's just something that's coming up is, it's more of that thought of a regional approach and a regional affordability, and charging what it costs and making sure those costs are effective. Sorry.
No, I understand what you're saying. And I think, a single utility provider doesn't have that luxury of saying, well, we're going to push some of our sewer costs over to
That's
the
right.
water rate or vice versa. So,
Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, John, I think we can move on.
All right, thank you. So some of the other considerations that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have some recommendations for those as well. This slide talks through the possibility of a distressed unit not meeting the affordability criteria. We went back and evaluated those units that with a distress score of 8 or greater. We didn't look whether or not it was both or single utility provider or providing both, just to kind of get a feel for what's the possibility of a system not being eligible for grant or loan. For step 1 population of less than 20,000, there's 9 units that would not be eligible to get past that step. That would be potentially designated as distressed. For step 2, another 14 units would not meet the threshold of 3 of the 5 local government unit indicators. For step 3, future OR, that's really difficult to predict because we don't have project costs. But regardless, just the possibility of having 23 distressed units not being eligible for grant or principal forgiveness consideration using the criteria, we felt that needed to be adjusted, and the recommendation is going to be to just if you're designated as distressed, you would move right to step 4 for the affordability criteria, and then determine your eligibility based on your rates and the project costs. The other consideration was looking at the project cost per connection in the affordability matrix. We felt that was a little bit of a confusing term and did not really relate well to the utility bill itself and the impact to the customers. And as Kim mentioned, that was one of the focuses of this evaluation, was making sure that it's reflective of what the customer sees or from the perspective of that customer. So we felt that potentially using a cost per connection per month was maybe a better indicator of affordability and a better tool, better value to use in the affordability calculator. So we made that conversion. We already have the data for cost per connection, and that's already provided in the application. So we would just assume a 0% interest in a 20-year loan, 20-year term loan for that, to calculate it as a cost per connection per month, which is then more relatable to the current bill. So we felt that's more easily related to current rates and more easily understood by the residential users. So we've kind of packaged it all together. You've seen this in the the March meeting. This would be the resulting proposed step 4, the previous affordability matrix, which is looking at first their combined monthly bill based on 5,000 gallons. Different ranges of rates result in a different grant or principal forgiveness eligibility. And then you would look at the combined monthly bill with that cost of the project added on and evaluate or come up with a second % grant or principal forgiveness eligibility, and whichever one is higher would be the ultimate eligibility for that particular application. You're also asked to see that in a graphical format and to be able to compare it to what the system we currently have. So you've seen this figure before. The blue dots are historical drinking water projects. The reddish dots are historical wastewater projects and where they would fall using the proposed methodology. And then the second figure, and this is in your staff report as well, of using the existing methodology and proposed project debt per service connection per month, how that would look. And you can see it's very similar distribution, but it does adjust, we feel, a little bit better for those higher project costs per connection projects. And you have that in your staff report, so you can toggle back and forth a little bit easier than I can. So staff recommends that the proposed affordability criteria updates be approved to go to public review. These updates include specific updates to step number 4, use a combined utility bill to determine grant and principal forgiveness eligibility, to use a conversion factor to allow single utility providers to calculate their grant and principal forgiveness eligibility, to use project cost per connection per month to determine grant and principal forgiveness eligibility, and then also to include a provision to allow designated distressed units to move directly to step 4 of the affordability tool. And with that, any questions?
Any questions for John? And you know, we've had some discussions about potentially modifying this from an action item standpoint to use the percentiles versus rates as we go to public review and update that. And I think this is a question for me that I would like to hear feedback on. Update those using new rates every year, every other year, or some other time period. I would suggest that maybe every other year, so that folks aren't always chasing what the next rate update would be. It gives them a couple of funding cycles to adjust. Any questions for John before we move to that motion? Okay, do we have a motion to go to public review?
This is Leila, so moved.
This is Ed. I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. I don't think Melody's joined back in yet. So Sharon?
Aye.
Maria?
Aye.
Bernadette?
Aye.
And Juhan?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes and we will go to public review as proposed. Okay, on the agenda, we're scheduled for a lunch at 12. I think we probably have time before then to move on to agenda item J. And let me just kind of gauge the authority members on, do we want to take a break after this or a full lunch and kind of, I will, once we get through agenda item J, I'll come back to you and get your opinion on that. But we thinking, do we want to take a 15-minute break or an hour break right after this? So agenda item J is emergency operating grant for the town of Robertsonville. And Amy has that. And Amy, before you start, let me just kind of put Sharon on notice that once we kind of go through this, Sharon, if you could give an update on the actions taken yesterday by the LGC on Pikeville and whether you think another emergency operating grant may be on the way for them. So just
Sure.
kind of
I have a question as well too on the Robertsonville item. Do I need to recuse myself?
I'll let Jill chime in on that. Jill, there's no financial connection between the LGC operating as a financial designee, I guess, maybe, for the town. The benefit is still to the town. Do you have any thoughts on that, or whether Sharon needs to recuse since she is associated with the LGC?
She is the one that signed the application.
Jill, you're muted if you're speaking. Maybe Jill had to step away. Sharon, I will leave that up to you.
Kim,
Oh, here we go.
I'm here. I was using the space bar to unmute and it apparently wasn't working.
Okay.
So and I did hear you, Kim. I could not hear what Sharon was saying a few times. But my sense is, based on what I have heard, is that Sharon likely does not have a legal conflict of interest. She would need to think about whether or not she has any personal bias regarding this particular agenda item, given her association with the town. But as far as her role with LGC, I believe it's my sense, it's my belief and opinion at this moment that she could still participate.
All right, thank you. I don't think I have any bias for or against at this point, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Amy?
Well,
Sorry, I'm trying to bite my tongue on that previous decision. Okay. The emergency operating grant for the town of Robertsonville, they have been taken over by the local government commission, and they have been, because of that, determined to be distressed. They have approximately 800 water and sewer customers. The actual numbers are slightly more water customers and slightly less residential sewer connections, but their combined bill for 5,000 is, as you can see, 111.25. 66.75 of that is for sewer and 45.50 is for water. We do have the application that was submitted to the authority members for $100,000. One clarification, this bullet says temporary manager salary shortfall. It is actually the $30,000 in the application, which is the immediate need, is for a part-time administrative assistant for the interim manager. There are also some funds in there for estimated operation and maintenance expenses that are unknown at this time. And there are significant deficits in both the general fund and the sewer fund. They do have separate water and sewer funds. So the water fund is okay, but the general fund and the sewer fund have significant deficits. So in accordance with the statute, we're recommending that you award a $100,000 emergency grant for operating deficits to the town of Robertsonville.
Any questions for Amy? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the award?
This is Bernadette. I move approval.
Thank you, Bernadette. Do we have a second?
This is Marie.
Jahan.
Go ahead, Jahan.
This is Jahan. I'll second.
Thank you, Jahan. Any discussion? Okay, let me check. I don't see Melody has joined back in. So Sharon?
Aye.
Leela?
Aye.
Ed?
Aye.
Maria?
Aye.
Thank you very much. The motion passes. And Sharon, as I mentioned, if you could just say a few words about the actions the LGC took and yesterday, and of course, yeah, those actions may have implications on this type need coming up again for another unit.
Right. So The commission voted yesterday to assume control of the finances of the town of Pikeville. Pikeville, as I said earlier, has water, sewer, electric, all three utilities provided by the town. I don't know enough yet at this point to know how bad their financial situation is. One of the reasons we felt the need to step in is because their books are about a year behind right now. And they have a new loan, 3 new loans coming on that they owe debt service on as of June 1st for the sewer system. At June 30, 2019, they had almost no unrestricted money in the general fund, and they had negative working capital in the water sewer fund. The electric fund was doing okay. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that there's enough operational inefficiency in the town that we won't need an emergency, operating grant or funding. But right now, I just don't know. So.
Thank you, Sharon. Certainly, for some of our units, they are continuing to struggle, particularly with some of the organizational issues that I think just kind of emphasize the need to kind of continue to help them, particularly in the context of the Viable Utility Program. Certainly a couple of years ago, I never would have envisioned the local government commission having taken over so many units. Certainly Sharon, I think, is being stressed, and her staff stressed in trying to—
That's an understatement, Kim.
Yes. Yes. On that front. So, with that, we are scheduled to take a lunch break. Let me get some feedback from the authority. Do you want to just take a shorter break and plow through the rest of the agenda? Our viable utility discussions are coming up, both potential action item and prioritization of the viable utility grants. Do you want to take a shorter break, plow through, longer break, and come back to that? And let me just kind of go through roll call wise and just start. If Melody, I don't see Melody on. Sharon, do you have a preference?
Not really.
Leela?
I would vote for short.
Okay. Ed?
I'm good with 20 minutes.
Okay. Maria?
20 works for me.
Bernadette?
Oh, let's say 21. No, I'm fine with 20.
I'll raise you to.
Juhan?
20 works for me as well.
Okay. We will take a 20-minute break. We will reconvene at 12:20, which actually makes it an 18-minute break, but I'm sure we may be a minute or two coming back. So we'll reconvene at 12:20. Thank you very much.
We received a notice that the priority point system that was in your package may not have matched what was approved. The intent is to take back to public review the approved version. So just wanted to let you know that there may be some differences in what's in your package, but our intent is to take to public review the version of the priority point system adopted on July 8th, 2020 during that authority meeting. And we'll make sure that that correct version is out for public review. Thanks, Kim.
Okay. Any questions on that? Again, we're just taking out with no changes to the existing priority system. Okay, hearing none, we will move on to agenda item K, units meeting the distress criteria. And with that, Linda, take it away.
All right, thank you. We're trying to do a little bit of a background review. The local government commission and the authority had adopted the identification criteria and the assessment criteria back in the meetings in November. And I asked for you if you could take quick note of the fourth criteria bullet, the other information representative of a distressed unit. We now have a town requesting designation, which would fall under that provision. The LGUs, which met the identification criteria, which are in attachment 1 for the agenda item, were presented to the LGC and the authority during their February meetings. The LGC designated those units as distressed at the February 1st, 2021 meeting, and the authority concurred with the distressed designations for the towns of Robersonville, Askew, Rhonda, and Wilkesboro at your February 10th meeting. And you've asked the division to give the other LGUs a chance to ask questions about the assessment evaluations. Next slide, please. Thank you. The authority asked for the units to be given notice that they were proposed for being designated under the new legislation and given time to respond back with information that could lessen their assessment scores below the identification criteria thresholds. And there's been a lot of ongoing discussions, a lot of great discussions with the LGUs regarding their assessment scores and the criteria. Including Maria Honeycutt, participation in the League of Municipalities webinar. Several stakeholders we've been talking to said they really appreciated that interaction and gained insight on what the Valuable Utility Program is all about. Many units have talked with Sharon and her staff at the LGC about financial aspects, so there's been a lot of great dialogue going on best practices. And per your direction, letters went out February 23rd to each of the units, and a deadline for response was shifted due to the interest to March 26th. We've received information from some that they want their scores to be reevaluated based on the financial and or infrastructure organizational so that their points would be lowered. Others actually wanted the reevaluation to increase their points and then get potential access to the VR funding. Some provided information surrounding their particular situations, which may not directly relate to a change in their score, but it does provide us insight on what they're experiencing locally. A summary of the responses was provided in attachment 2 to agenda item K. And the full responses were provided in the Jump Drive meeting materials that Jennifer sent you. Note that throughout our discussions, we have talked to the town of Polkville, and they have requested to be designated so that they can work in concert with other towns in Cleveland County. The town of Stovall has asked to be remained in the hold category for now. We had some discussion on their response letter. They're interested in funding, but without a full picture of the potential funding available, they would like to wait to be before they're designated. In addition, DWI and LGC staff have been in discussion with utilities across the state already designated and their surrounding communities that reached the assessment criteria. Those were in Martin and Wayne County, and we're setting up conversations in May for Cleveland and Wilson counties, listening to their thoughts on approaching the valuable solutions for multiple units and trying to share any insight we have on the process ahead and potential funding. We are planning for the orientation sessions with the units that are designated to help them develop the scope for their studies. We want to make sure that we're a part of those conversations to help ensure they're casting a wide enough net to bring the information back needed to make those long-term decisions toward viability. Also in that effort, we've talked with the Mayor of Fallston about the VUR program and the upcoming discussions planned for also in Cleveland County. She talked with their town's elected officials at their April 6th meeting, and they've asked to be designated. Their assessment score was a little bit below, was 1 point below the threshold. They have a depreciation set at 48%. Their affordability, they had 5 out of 5 of the LGU indicators being worse than the state benchmark. Their debt service coverage ratio, it was a negative 0.59, where the threshold is less than 1.1. Operating margin was 0.55, and the threshold is less than 0. They did have 273 days cash on hand. I do want to mention that. Looking at from an infrastructure standpoint, drinking water lines, they had 73 population per mile, which is below the threshold that was set at 100 per mile. So that's the one that would fall into the consideration for that fourth identification criteria, that other criteria. We want to talk with you about the responses that we received and go through them more thoroughly, but I want to break here for just a second to see if you have any questions. Okay. So as we look at the assessment scores and the responses, I thought it'd be helpful to look at, to review the thresholds you've established for identification of the distressed units. Yeah. So the total, if you had a total of 9 or more points for a unit providing both water and wastewater utilities, that was the threshold for designation. If you only had provided only one of the services, the threshold was 8 points. So again, in attachment 1, that contains the assessment evaluation, and Susan updated that based on the responses. And attachment 2 is the summary, and we're going to go over that more thoroughly as well. 3 of the units provided documentation that they no longer own their utilities. And if you look on attachment 1, you'll see those towards the bottom. They're in lines 118 through lines 120. And then there were 3 units that provided information that would lower their score below the identification threshold. Those are down to that same area. They're in lines 123 to 125 in attachment 1. So in attachment 2, you'll see that we have 18 units that we have suggested, our recommendation is to indicate as hold. Some of these need further evaluation by the LGC staff to give them time to look at some of the financial information, and I might hold and let Sharon speak to any of the conversations that they've had. Sharon?
Thanks. Sorry, I'm still munching on my lunch here.
Sorry.
Excuse me. I know Carteret County is possibly in the process of selling their water fund to a private provider. So I know that one, I understand what's going on there. I'm not sure what's up with Beaufort County, Davidson County, or Edenton. Edgecombe County, don't know what's going on there either. Some of these we don't have any information on just yet. So trying to see if there's any other ones on here.
Sharon, are there any that you've had just direct conversations with?
That's what I'm looking for, because the ones I talked to were, and the ones that I spent a lot of time working with, the outcome really didn't change. So no, I don't see anybody on here that we've actually spoken directly to about any of this.
So there's quite a few of them that we have recommended to hold so that we can talk with them a little bit further about their information. I know I had talked personally with Glen Alpine a couple of weeks ago, and I know they had a situation where when I first talked with them, they didn't think they owned their collection system, but then they had since found that they do own the collection system, but they have they pump to City of Morganton. So, and I know they had a transition in staff. Staff member had passed away, and they had just refilled the position back in February. Was about the time I was talking to them. So there's situations like that we know that are going on. There were one, though, that their information really did not change the scores. They were providing good information just about the background of the facility and their personal situation. And we've tried to identify when we were working with Martin County just earlier this week, and we recognize each town has its own story. You know, they're all unique in different situations, and that's what we're trying to keep in mind as we're going through the process. And some of them, I could say, in speaking with the mayor of Stovall, you know, she asked me personally, you know, Linda, do you think we're distressed? Because she said, I don't think we're distressed in the terms that perhaps maybe some folks have looked at that terminology. But they definitely are interested in, they need funding for a mixer for their water tank, and they have fire hydrants that are potentially leaking, and she's concerned about the loss of water there. So there's definitely needs in the community. But at this time, they have asked for us to consider them just in that hold category, and that's what the recommendation includes. Break there too is if you've had a chance to take a look at the attachment two, if there's any particular questions or how we went around the task of categorizing them. Okay. Well, I'm going to shift into the staff recommendations. So our recommendation is kind of fourfold, so let me walk through each of them. Staff recommends that the authority hold off on designations for those who provided information needing further review, and they're identified as hold in column C in attachment 1. And this provides us and the LGC staff time to review the information before the authority makes a decision. For those units which did not respond and did not provide information that would lower their assessment scores below the threshold that you approved for the identification of being distressed, we recommend moving forward with the designations. And these are identified as designate in column C of attachment 1. And our recommendation is to remove the 3 no longer owning their systems. That would remove them from the assessment evaluation process. For those who provided information which we've been able to evaluate that revised their assessment score, and that would be below the identification threshold, we recommend reducing their scores and not designating them. These units would, though, continue to be evaluated in future assessments, since they're still public utilities subject to the viable utility statute. So I throw that out there. I don't know if you have any questions you'd like to discuss.
Any questions for Linda?
Linda, this is Leila. I know you went over these, but just to clarify, are there any that we would be designating that prefer us to hold?
We go through just to make sure. Cumberland County, as we've just talked about, I'm not sure that we actually talked about Cumberland County. I'll bring that up forth. They were ones that wanted to make sure we had correct information, and to add points potentially, because they wanted to be considered for future funding, and they wanted that information to be accurate as to not jeopardize future project assistance. So that one on the first page of my sheet, Cumberland County definitely wants to be included in the designation. Gamewell, they gave information about the UAL control, which would be 3 points. They sit at 12 points right now as a single provider. They had a question on the surplus, on the debt. Looking at Gamewell, you can see we included some of the specific response. That town has 1 employee. Council members sign the checks. Most of the sewer customers are paying the bills through Caldwell County. along with the water bills. 18 customers are billed directly by the town. This is one where we thought that bringing them into the Viable Utility Program will actually give them the support and the assistance that they need to be able to look at long-term solutions for their facility. The next, Glen Alpine, I already spoke about. That one, it would not, what they provided is more background information and not providing information to change the points. I'll move on to Pilot Mountain, and this is one where they had asked to give consideration. They had received in 2016 the MRF grant, and they're working on the AIA that they received in 2018. This is one, Layla, that would be in that category of they've asked not to be designated. They are doing a lot of work towards meeting the program requirements for the VUR. So this is one of consideration. Do you designate them and formally get them into the VUR program, or do you do something different? But from a staff standpoint, we recommend there's still some oversight for them to make sure that they're continuing along in the process, and they've got that endpoint of long-term viability in mind. Polkville, I think I've already spoken about. They have, the mayor has sent us an email asking that they are considered for designation today. And Seaboard, here Seaboard is the one they've added, they've increased their rates. So they now have a combined bill of $118, which would add a point, and then 4 points for revenue outlook. So they go from currently 9 points to 14 points because they will have priority on funding them, I'm sure. And Tryon, again, some of their information, they were concerned about criteria that's outside their direct control and neglects to take actions or to account for positive actions they have taken. Again, they have the AIA grants in 2019 and 2018, 2019 and 2020, and they have taken steps to develop the 10-year SIP and financial model. So again, they're similar in vein that they are taking steps. From a staff standpoint, we feel like that we can guide them if they're officially in the VUR program, using our resources as well to make sure they're move along in their journey. And then Yadkin County, the information they provided would only lower their score by 1 point, and they currently have 14 points. So that they would continue to be considered meeting your distress criteria. Leila, does that help?
It does. So it sounds like probably, and I know Linda and I talked about this some when we first got these tables to look at. And so it sounds like Pilot Mountain and Tryon potentially are the only ones that in their response, it sounded like they even said, we feel like we're being penalized. And my comment was, I mean, we've all had the discussion, this isn't meant to penalize, but if somebody's on the edge and they understand what the designation means and they still are saying, we don't want to be designated, I feel like maybe we should take that into consideration, because all it would be doing potentially is requiring them to do some things, maybe do some training. I mean, so that's where, if they understand all of that, that really the designation gets them access to probably to some free training and maybe some priority for funding, and they still don't want it and they're right on the edge, then I question whether maybe we should hold till we have, So I'm almost saying those ones on the edge, I feel like they should sort of be in agreement or at least understanding rather than us have to deal with them being really mad at us when they're on that edge. That's not a very coherent comment, I don't feel like, but I know Linda and I had a long discussion about this.
Well, and Leela, I feel exactly the same that, and what I've said to Linda and what I've said before when I couldn't get my thoughts together in the same breath is the systems that are on the edge. And if funding's not available for them anyway, because we know what we have and we see the number of systems and how, you know, the recommendation for priority is, the whole system was developed to help. And so if the designation causes more harm than assistance, then if they're on the edge, I 100% agree with you that they should be able to designate for themselves if they want to move forward or not, or if they want to be designated or not. But like with Pilot Mountain and Tron, I mean, they're in the 12 and 13. Like, to me, that's not on the edge. That's too high. Like, to me, they should, yes, they're doing this positive work, but who's to say that that's the right steps they need to be taking? Like, I don't know what's in Tron's CIP. Like, and I know them, like they're the county next to me and we've talked. That's how I feel about that. And then Linda and I talked about, I mean, this is on her next slide, like that we don't do anything with, you know, the ones that are on hold to move them like on or off. Like, these need to be legit conversations, not just a letter to a mayor that might or might not get the email. This needs to be, I mean, it's, if we're taking it seriously enough and we want them to take it seriously enough, it is a dialogue with them, with the right people.
Yep, that's well said, Maria, and thank you for clarifying, because I got mixed up as I kept flipping back and forth on how many points those two had. So I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay. Sharon has her hand raised. Sharon?
Yeah, I'll just weigh in, excuse me, on both of those units as well. I was going to point out the points, but Maria beat me to it. Both of those units have been on our unit assistance list for a number of years for a variety of reasons. They both of them are struggling with a lot of issues, and I think they could really benefit from being labeled as distressed, particularly in the training department.
Okay, further questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
If I can interject too, I have failed to go back to make sure there's conversation on the town of Fallston. I went over their information really quickly because they were that they were on that bubble too. And they're below currently the designation threshold from the assessment criteria. But I think I'd given you those indicators that they're right on the edge, and they would really like to participate in the regional discussions going on in Cleveland County, and so that they could be a full partner in that regional effort. It looks like we're going to try to have a meeting down there in mid-May to get all the communities together, and it just sounds like talking to some of the different mayors. They're very excited about it. It's not a new thing. They have talked about this before, but there seems to be a renewed energy to it. So I want to make sure when there's a motion made that we would consider that, and just if there's any questions on the town of Fallston being approved on it.
So, Linda, let me ask you a question just to make sure we're clear. And what's on the screen right now, Fallston is not included in this recommendation, but should be. Is that accurate?
That is correct. The conversations happened after the materials were issued.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask for questions again, given that slight change in recommendation on the staff.
This is Leela. So I just want to clarify it. is there any reason Falston can't participate in any of the things happening if they're not designated distressed?
They can participate, but they're not eligible for grants to help the participation from the Viable Utility Reserve. Linda, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking with them about being part of, if there's one grant application and one AIA concept being done consistently across that region. So when they come back together, they're going to get information about their uniqueness of their towns, but at the same time, they have apples to apples conversations. If they're looking at, say, an MRF or something, we want to make sure that they have that information in a consistent manner to best frame that dialogue on regionalization.
Leila, did that answer your question?
It does. And my only concern is to have the mechanism of their participation be to designate them as distressed, because then what if anybody who's got 6 points or 7 points can say, we want to be distressed? And why would we say no? So,
yeah. Understood. And that definitely mirrors some of the conversations we've had as staff. And when we look at Falston, we kind of look back at the data. And if I remember correctly, let me pull it up real quick. I think with Falston, their percent depreciation is essentially from 2019 at 48%. So, if it's been 50, they're distressed, and it probably is 50 now. So they're so close that they're not like, just doing this for participation purposes, but they really probably are distressed. And I think that's part of the staff recommendation. So I see Ed and Maria both have their hands up, so I don't know who was first.
Let Ed go.
When we went through this criteria early on, we wanted to make sure we had flexibility to do this, to designate someone distressed that the numbers didn't immediately justify. But I think we still need, I need information presented to me from staff, the kind of discussion we're having right now, but I think that needs to be a separate agenda item. I don't think it should be part of this agenda item. This is to approve the list. I think a first item would be to approve categorizing them as distressed, putting them on the list, and then adopting the list. And I think it's incumbent upon staff to give us clearly the specific points that you have learned as staff as to why we should consider that. And we shouldn't be dealing with this anecdotally. It should be, here's what we've discovered, as you just pointed out. Well, they were 48% depreciation. They're probably more than that now, based upon what we have learned and what we have done. And I think as board members, we need to hear that.
Maria?
I just, before we completely leave, I mean, we can go ahead with the motion or whatever, but what I'm really curious about, to put Sharon on the spot, sorry, of what you've learned, like Ed was saying, what do we know needs to be done differently going forward? Like how, so a piece of what criteria might need to be tweaked that is gonna tell a fuller story, like tweak existing, what needs to be added, what's not reflective, or because what's been asked of me is, data that's submitted going forward through the audit or through some other means, how is that how we ask for the data or how the audit is presented that would more accurately reflect some of the themes that you're seeing in the systems that came back and provided additional information. I'd like to know how we're gonna, so we don't end up with this kind of situation of we had the LGC and staff have to evaluate 30 different additional stories and scenarios for these systems later.
That's a great question, Maria. One thing that we did notice in several different entities was the way they were recording their accounts receivable. And without getting into too many accounting weeds, hang on, now they're telling me they're getting ready to restart my computer. I don't know why that always have to happen in the middle of the day. Accounts receivable, okay. Some entities, and we have started putting this out there for them not to continue to do this, but some entities were lumping in all sorts of receivables in their accounts receivable number. So for example, the clients that Maria collects for, like Cliffside, they would be lumping in what their customers actually owed them with what Broad River owed them for the money they had collected in June, you know, right before fiscal year end. And so it skews that receivables ratio. That's one of the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing.
Well, and Sharon, if I can just ask, I mean, to clarify on that though, is then that, I guess what my question is too, is that then an education of the system to fight with their auditor to say this is a different type of receivable because it has been collected for the customer? Or, you know, my pet peeve has always been these reimbursable expenses where I have to show the expense, but I don't get credit for the revenue because it's not operating revenue. Or so is it education of the system to advocate for that reporting, or is it an education of the auditing and the accepted, you know, general accepted practices or whatever that's called? I mean, is there a different category that that you are gonna advocate for to say, no, this needs to be listed separately?
Yes, and the answer to all that's yes. I mean, it will be an education process for both the units and the auditors. And for my staff, quite honestly, to look for that. And, you know, a piece of data that might be helpful, and I don't know if this database exists anywhere, is units of government that don't do their own billing and collecting. You know, if we could add that data in there somewhere, so we would know that they should have a due from other entity in addition to just straight accounts receivable. So that's one thing. We've had a couple of units that, and I think this is Yadkin County falls into this category now that I think about it, where they knew going in that their system was never going to be profitable. It was a health issue or an economic development project or something else. They didn't enter into it with the intention of running a profitable enterprise system. And I would hate to have to keep going back to them every time we update this list, you know, to find out that information. And then there was another entity, and I honestly don't remember which one it is right this minute, that, you know, years ago, Article 40 or 42, I don't remember anymore, was partially restricted for water sewer for municipalities. And whichever municipality this was, decided to just continue to use that money for the utility system. It was a conscious decision to voluntarily restrict the sales tax even once the restriction expired to help fund their system. Whether or not that should be held against them is probably up for debate, but it's a piece of information that we need to know, I think.
Yeah, and it rings a bell, that one does, that may be Carteret County. But I don't know that for sure.
It would be a municipality because they were the only ones that had restricted sales tax for utilities. For the counties, it was restricted for schools.
Gotcha.
Okay,
and maybe that's a future agenda item in July, is to kind of have some sort of report back on some of this, where we can get into a little more of the details, and maybe Sharon give you some time to to prepare.
Can I ask one more thing?
Sure.
On that? Sharon, what's your thoughts about how we consider like the SSOs and when corrective actions? Because I saw that on several of the towns where they've actually done something that, and those have not been repeated. Like, can we, in future recommendations, can we look at what the systems have done in the same way, just like the revenue outlook and that ability for a unit to charge more if they've done a full-on rate study and they're following those recommendations? I guess it's kind of to Ed's point too, like our evaluation and assessment of there is some long-term strategic planning going on, not if they're a 12 or a 13, but if they're, if they're doing the right things and they're doing exactly what they've said. And what I've shared with Sharon and Kim and several of them is that utilities are now saying, like, I understand that I am stressed and I will always be stressed by the nature of my utility. But if we're doing all the right things, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm distressed. And so I think that's a really light bulb moment for a lot of them to say, just because of the nature of your system, you need to pay attention to these things even more. But I really hope that we'll consider those kind of things as part of the story.
I think we probably have an opportunity to consider that going forward. I mean, all of this is to a great extent a point in time measure.
Yes.
And so I would expect us to tweak it.
Yeah.
Moving forward, and that may be one of the things we need to look at is to, again, this first assessment was done based on
the data you had at the time.
The data we had at the time, and
for thousands of systems.
Right, and so of course going forward, I think we would want to have the opportunity to refine it and make it better, and that may be one of the things we should look at.
Yeah. And
okay.
Maria, since you mentioned SSOs, let me ask John if he had anything to chime in on that aspect as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And Maria, we've kind of built that in a little bit to our just procedures for that data. We get the compliance data from Division of Water Resources, and we've built into that some feedback with them to get more of that story on ongoing violations to see if they've been addressed. That particular point of the criteria is based on the highest percentage of violations. So we really think it's important to get that feedback before we contribute a point, because we don't want to give them some criteria points if they've addressed that issue. So thanks.
And yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate that.
Leela, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Ed said. I agree about separating out the agenda, the other community, Falston, from this agenda item. And also want to echo what Maria said, that I think, at least what I think I learned, is that we do want this to be a conversation. But I also wouldn't anticipate, like, this is the first time we've done it, first look at all these communities. I wouldn't anticipate it'll be a very long list going forward, because we've already done this big, if we do this big push and we look at the ones even that are on hold, the next ones we consider will only be ones that maybe their points are going from 7 to 8 or from 8 to 9 or 7 to 14 or whatever, but it'll be a smaller list. And so I just want to reiterate, as if we talk about this at our next meeting and our process going forward, that it is a conversation. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone when we designate them as distressed. And it should be I'm not going to say welcome, but understood and accepted. And if not, then we have more work to do.
Thank you, Leela. Sharon, you've got your hand raised. Is that a relic from before?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, just checking. So any additional questions before we entertain a motion? Just checking. Okay. There's the staff recommendation. And I guess we can entertain a motion.
I would move to approve that we move forward with the motion as it stands here, that Falston's a separate issue. So what's presented on attachment 1.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that, Kim.
Okay, Sharon seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go through a roll call vote. Melody, we'll start with you.
Aye.
Leela?
Aye.
Ed?
Aye.
Bernadette?
Aye.
And Juhan, are you back on? No, Juhan had a phone call. He had to step away. Let me just check one more time. Juhan, are you? Okay, you must have had to step away, still on that phone call. So the motion passes. And let me check with respect to Falston, just to make sure I understand. Is the expectation at a future meeting, whether that's July or maybe sometime in between now and then, to come back with a specific agenda item for Falston with additional information, or did we just want to consider it as a separate motion? Any thoughts on that?
This is it. I would think it's a separate motion that, and to support that motion, you would come back with some specific analysis that you've done, an explanation as to why you think they should be included on this list.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Does that delay affect anything that you're doing?
It would if Cleveland County wanted to submit an application for all of the towns. And Ed, I didn't know if it would be helpful. I went over some information early on, and let me see if this is helpful or not. For the town of Falston, for affordability, they had 5 out of the 5 LGU indicators. They were worse than the state benchmarks. Kim mentioned the depreciation is at 48%. Their operating margin is negative 0.55. Debt service coverage ratio is 0.59. And then the drinking water lines, I think I'd mentioned 73 people per population per mile. I didn't mention on the wastewater side, we don't have accurate information to know how much wastewater line that they own. So that's why we were really advocating if we can go ahead and get them into an AIA grant that would put all of those communities in the same standing to help move forward.
So
I'm not sure if it helped or not.
Go ahead, Linda, and finish your thought. Sorry.
No, that was it. I didn't know if that helped or not.
What we can do, because if Cleveland County comes forward with that type of grant application versus designating Falston today, we could proceed that application with a consideration for Falston, and then that grant application could or could not include Falston depending on that action at that future meeting, and we could provide additional information at that time. Doing it today provides a little more certainty for the community, obviously, but there is an alternative to that, and I want to make sure that's clear.
Again, this is Ed, and I prefer the scenario you just laid out, Kim, and basically because this is the first time we're doing this. And I don't think it should just be an oral report from staff that said, here's some of the items. I think that it needs to be presented as an agenda item. It's important for us to see just where that would, how that moves the needle. You know,
Right.
I understand those criteria, but okay, how much does that move the needle or not? And how close are they? And I'd like to see all that.
Okay. Before we move on, any additional thoughts? Hearing none, we will then, Linda, do you want to review the next steps before we go through the next agenda item?
Absolutely, thank you. And we wanted to make sure that we had good communication ourselves. So we were sharing with you our next steps on the communication pathway moving forward. And so we are planning to send letters to those that are on hold to let them know that we're continuing to review the information that they submitted, and also to those that are newly designated. We want to make sure we acknowledge that for those who submitted a response, that information was considered and why the decision was made to move forward, that their information did not reduce the assessment score, and just underscore in a way our support for them and how we want to help move forward with them. Also mailing letters to the ones that were removed from the evaluation because they no longer own the systems, and those whose scores were changed, and so they no longer meet the identification threshold. And Leila and Maria, I will talk with Pilot Mountain. I did not get a chance to do that before the meeting, and the same with Tryon as well, to make sure that they understand we have a direct line of communication in helping to support them too. As indicated earlier, we're continuing to work with the communities around the initial units that you designated and encouraging those discussions with the potential partners and the potential funding for long-term solutions. That's been a key. The unknowns regarding the amount of funding that may be available in the near future, that kind of just hangs in the air in our conversations. You know, we wish we knew more, but we're trying to ensure the communities are in the best position they can be in, so when funding for long-term solutions is available, that they're going to be ready to go. So the other next step we have is developing the funding prioritization system for the study grants. Okay to move forward with that?
Let's go ahead.
Okay, that's good. So again, trying to provide just a little bit of background from the general statutes. We are providing you the prioritization for your review, and then you consider that in your determination. And specifically for the Viable Utility Reserve Funds, the grants awards must be approved by the LGC, and that mirrors the loan approval process for these units, so they're familiar with that. Next slide. Thank you. We're working with that initial $9 million that was promulgated to the fund last year. And the criterion that you have set aside so far, well, actually I should mention too, that you already approved the emergency operating grants for the town of Kingstown today at your meeting as well. The current criterion that you've designated so far is awarding funds to those that you have approved as designation as distressed. And we continue to support the concept that was presented at our last meeting to give priority to support units in that geographic areas where they can work together in partnership and have a focus on working with those that are ready to undertake the studies given the limited available funding that we have right now. Some have applied for AIA funds in the past, and this is looked as an opportunity for them to gain support to get their efforts underway. The assessment study is fundamental to understanding what you have. I'm speaking to the choir here, so you can plan for what you need. Same as the rate studies, and if you don't do these evaluations well up front, you're not going to have the information you need to lean in towards those long-term viable solutions. So next, I'm going to talk about the two categories of funding priorities for these study grants. and a little bit more information about them based on discussions since our March meeting. So again, looking at just the study grants, the assessment, asset assessment, the rate studies, and the merger regionalization feasibility studies, again, this is a simple approach. We have category 1. Those would be units which the LGC has assumed the fiscal control. Category 2, everybody else, all the other distressed units. Any initial questions on those two categories? Okay. To give a little bit of foreshadowing, we're recommending to approve implementing the prioritization for the grants in category 1. And we're recommending a 30-day public review period for the category 2 prioritization concepts that we're recommending. So just want to be able to keep that in mind as we talk about it a little bit, each of these further. So looking at the details for category 1, again, the simple approach, we're proposing to include regional partners near those units in the funding applications. When feasible, we encourage these communities to submit one application for the study, and with the intent for one entity to conduct the study across the utilities so they can discuss potential partnerships with the information that's gathered in a similar manner. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll all agree to a solution that they all want to implement, but it sets that foundation so that they can better discuss options with equal footing. Okay. Any questions on category 1? Okay. So category 2, these would be all the other designated units. Ideal if anyone, Sharon hasn't taken the reins over yet on their fiscal control. Back in March, we proposed using assessment scores as the basis for a competitive grant process for category 2. The idea is we would satisfy the needs in category 1, and hopefully we're doing some of that while category 2 is potentially out for that public review. And then category 2 would be a competitive process. Kim presented the concepts of working with the units in groups rather than one by one, going through the units by their scores. This would help where there's a unit ready to move forward, and we don't necessarily want to hinder them by having to wait for each unit in numerical order to decide if they want to seek the study grant funding right then. We would open the grants for those with scores 13 and above first and fulfill their needs, and then open it up to those with assessment scores of 11 to 12, and then move on to those with scores of 8 to 10. And I made an analogy with Maria and Leila. It's kind of like the vaccination groups. You know, you open it up to highest priority first, and then at each layer you're opening the doors a little bit wider as you go. And we're hoping that additional funding is going to be provided to work through all of these. The number of units is shown for each group, and that was based on our recommendations to designate the units after reviewing those response letters. If we get to a funding demand where choices have to be made on applicants within the same group, we propose using these 4 metrics from the assessment scores, again, keeping back to information we have, to determine the priority. If there's a tie among the applicants, we'll look at unique aspects, such as whether they barely just met an assessment criterion or other particular circumstances of the utility. Any questions on category 2? Okay. Well, as I indicated earlier, we're recommending approval to go ahead and implement the prioritization for working with category 1 units, and that the prioritization concepts for category 2 go out to public review. And this ideally could go out with the IUP along with those items for review as well. And that's it. Entertain questions and ideas.
Any questions for Linda? Anybody need any clarification? Let's see, anybody having their hand raised? Don't hear anything. Do we have a motion to approve?
This is Ed. Don't make a motion to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Jahan. I do a second.
Okay, thank you, Jahan. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go through roll call vote. Melody?
Aye.
Sharon?
Aye.
Leila?
Aye.
Maria?
Aye.
Bernadette?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Motion passes. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Okay. Last agenda item, remarks by authority members, chair, and council. Again, we'll go through the roll call in alphabetical order. Melody, you're up first.
Well, first of all, I would just like to say thanks to Kim for your fearless leadership over these years that I've been involved with the authority, and certainly even before that, heard so many good things about what you were doing, what your team was doing, what this authority was doing, and I certainly attribute that to your leadership. It's going to be a real different authority, going forward. I know that your staff will carry on. You have put together a great team, so I'm not worried about that, but we will certainly miss your leadership. And also Julie's leadership. I had heard that she might be leaving, so hearing today that, she's also leaving at the end of the month, another big loss for DEQ and the team. But again, she's got a great team as well, and they will carry on, and certainly look forward to, hearing about what's next for you and for Julie, and, certainly helping out and being involved in any way that I can in my official role. And just, look forward to continuing to work with the board. So best of luck and Godspeed.
Thank you, Melody. Sharon.
Okay, well, first I'll comment on the business of today. I've really appreciated all the work that has gone into the distressed unit criteria. And just from what we're seeing with the units that we have had to step in, I think the training component of this is going to be so critical. We're just seeing more and more where boards are just disengaged or ill-informed or both. And staff doesn't know everything they need to know. And so I really think that the training component of all of this will serve us well in the long run. I do want to thank both Kim and Julie. I've known both of you, I think, for a long time now, and certainly enjoyed the working relationship we've developed with both teams over the years. I've learned so much from both of you, and I will miss you greatly. But like Melody, I know y'all got good teams put together, and we will carry on without you. But wish you would stay, but I understand why you're going. So best of luck to both of you.
Thank you, Sharon. Leila?
So as always, thanks to staff for all the hard work you put into the materials, and especially to Linda for reaching out based on my comments at the last meeting. That was really helpful. And I think we're on a good path, and it amazes me that as long as we've been doing this, it seems like almost every meeting we're saying, well, this is going to be the first time we've done this, so let's see how it goes. But it's evolved. The program has evolved, I think, in a really good way. And thanks in no small part to Kim and to Julie. So Kim, your leadership has been exceptional. And, you know, I can't imagine that we would have gotten to where we are today without a lot of the foresight you put into how you structured the program and how you structured your staff and developing your staff so that we really do have a good team to help us once you're gone. So congratulations, and we'll miss you. And Julie, for those of us who weren't as familiar with the CDBG program, I really appreciate how you jumped in and educated us and answered a lot of questions, not so many lately, but certainly in the beginning. It was a real learning process. So thank you and good luck, and both of you have fun.
Thank you, Leila. Ed?
Well, first and foremost, congratulations, Kim, on your retirement, and best of luck in your next career. And try not to do too many, though. At some point, you really want to retire. And again, just echoing what the other members have already said, this board is fortunate to have a great staff to work with DEQ. And again, Kim, your leadership and managing both the staff and providing the leadership on the board has been invaluable to me, and I really appreciate it. And we'll miss working with you, and I regret never having met you in person, other than through this little tiny video screen that you show up on. But best of luck in your new endeavors.
Thank you, Ed. We will definitely meet in person at some point. Maria?
Okay. I feel like I need to, we'll do a shout out to Cal. Like, I'm so thrilled that I just now learned how to raise my hand on as long as we've been doing that. So I had that Cal moment, like I have figured it out. I have arrived. I think my overall feelings are just of appreciation really for the whole process and the people that have been a part of it. That I mean, with Kim and with Linda and Sharon, I mean, the way y'all listened to the reactions and just your willingness for it to be a process, to say, like, I don't know the map, but here's the compass of where we're going. And I just appreciate the willingness to listen and respond thoughtfully and intelligently, and to guide us in the right way to present this and to roll it out. And as Sharon mentioned with the training, like, what excites me is that yes, there was an emotional response in the beginning, but what I'm seeing on my side from my peers, utilities are really, they're hungry for this training, and they're hungry for how to do it better, how to do it, you know, it may not be right, but it's getting it right. Like, what's the process of getting it right and leaving that legacy when they're ready to leave, of how it's done in the future, and not having their name attached to the period where it went down the tubes. You know, like, it's important, and they're taking it that way, and I love that. And I guess I could, you know, do my selfish response to Julie and Kim's retirement is I'm having no part of it. Like, I'm not for it. If I'm on your council of friends, you're making the wrong choice. No, I'm just I fully support you. You know, have the utmost respect for both of you. I've learned so much from both of you. Even Julie, like, I really think Julie was one of the first kind of people I talked to at that level when she was with the Rural Center. Like, gosh, that was like 18 years ago when I started in the utility field on the engineering side. And that's just like a really long time ago. But I just appreciate what both of you have done in the organization and for the industry as a whole. Like, I'm excited to see where each of you go next and what you do with it. Even if it's, like we told Francine, like at home with her cat, like, that's cool too. So congratulations to both of you, and thank you so much for what you've done through this process and just through your careers and the impact that you've had. It's really amazing.
Thank you, Maria. Bernadette.
Oh, I just have to echo what everybody has said. When you're sort of last, there's not much new to say. I do wish Kim and Julie, I wish you the very best. I know you will have exciting new ventures in your life, and that's good. Change is a very good thing. I do want to say, and you sort of repeat what people have said about the level of professionalism. And today was a very good example of showing how, Kim, you've set this leadership with all the staff where you respond to all the comments that the people on this authority make. And it's a real collaboration. And I think when you have more minds like looking at issues that are very difficult issues, you can come up with some better solutions, and everybody here is motivated. And it's just a wonderful process. And I think we're making great progress, even though there's a lot more to do. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bernadette. And Juhan, your last, and I apologize. I probably should have at some point gone in reverse alphabetical order.
No problem. No worries, Kim. I'd like to thank staff for, again, all the hard work and their responsiveness to all of the questions and discussions that this authority has for them in trying to make the best decisions that helps move the great state of North Carolina forward when it comes to infrastructure and utilities. And then I would also like to thank Kim and Julie for all of your hard work and dedication throughout the years to NCDEQ and the authority with your leadership and being so knowledgeable about utilities and the path that we're going. So thank you for that, and wish you the best of luck in your retirement endeavors.
Thank you, Juhan. Jill, closing remarks from council.
These are personal remarks to Kim and Julie. Just best of luck going forward. And it's been a real pleasure getting to work with you and learn from you. So enjoy.
Thank you, Jill. So thank you to all the authority members, both the current ones here today and also the past, again, for your willingness to serve the state and to help us address our water infrastructure needs. Thank you to the Attorney General's office for providing the support to the authority. I know it's always comforting to be able to, when we were in person, to lean over, ask Jill a question, are we doing this in the right procedural way, and different things like that. Of course, my job as chair is infinitely easier with the great staff we have here in the division. It's amazing the amount of work they do and how much organization they put into this that makes my job so much easier. And in addition to that, they're constantly giving me those reminders and cues to keep me on the correct path. But working on these issues with the staff and the authority, I will tell you, has been one of the most extremely rewarding aspects of my career with DEQ. And I very much appreciate the work that you've all done and our collaboration, as you've mentioned. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done, and I definitely look forward to seeing that good work that the division and the authority are doing from a little bit of a different perspective. So best wishes to you all, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.